With only 12 seconds on the clock, a silent plea echoes for anyone to help. Through a terrified eye, a single damning number comes into focus. The full horrifying reality sets in, a desperate refusal to let his life end this way. His face is a mask of pure agony, a silent scream trapped within. Through glasses blurred by tears, the world fades into a watery haze. The countdown continues, mocking his confusion as the seconds slip away. From behind, his silhouette hangs, the fight slowly draining from his body. His hands claw at his throat, questioning the reason for this torment. Branded on his forehead is the number that marks his fate, 1. His eyes snap open with a dawning, terrible understanding. He is not the only one. Others hang beside him, each marked with their own number. In this sterile white room of the dead, he questions how he ever arrived here. And more importantly, what is the meaning of it all? The timer finally reaches 0. A shadowy figure emerges from above, declaring that the game is over. Its piercing eyes lock onto him, addressing him by his new name. Player 1. A monstrous entity with a wicked grin announces that it's his turn to play. A strange, six-sided die covered in watching eyes is presented as his only option. The world dissolves, flashing back to a rainy night in the city, back to a simpler time, when his only concern was studying for his university entrance exams, the life he was trying to build. An 18-year-old student named Zuo Hui, filling out a job application. A voice calls his name, pulling his attention away from the screen. A flicker of panic as he quickly minimizes the window. He turns to find his mother's steady gaze upon him. She's leaving for her night shift, reminding him to focus on his approaching exams. He promises to study after a shower, watching as she prepares to leave. A final, caring reminder to take an umbrella for the rain outside. A quiet moment passes, a silent understanding between mother and son. The memory then shifts to the glowing sign of the restaurant where he worked. His first day is a blur of pressure, with a demanding manager barking orders. Despite the harsh words, he steels himself for the task ahead. He approaches a table, fumbling with his words as he delivers the food. A strained smile is all he can manage, a mask of professionalism. In the window's reflection, an image of his mother appears, a silent source of motivation. The vision shifts to her standing alone in the downpour, a solitary figure against the gray. And just as suddenly his eyes fly open, the memories crashing into his horrifying present. It was his mother, her gaze fixed on him with a fierce determination. She had found him outside the restaurant where he secretly worked. In her hand, a red umbrella was clenched with white-knuckled force. Thrusting it towards him, she demanded he go home immediately. He could only question why she wasn't at her own job. But his confusion was met with pure anger. She confronted him about lying, about working when he should have been studying. Her voice rose with desperation, pleading for him to focus on his university entrance exams. Every word was a reminder of his failures, of his disappointing grades. His eyes darted away, unable to meet the weight of her stare. All her hopes, she reminded him, were pinned entirely on his success. The pressure was immense, a constant, suffocating weight on his shoulders. His attempts to placate her were useless, as her frustration boiled over. She questioned if he even cared about getting into university at all. A future of stability, of success, of a life better than hers. A life he suddenly couldn't bear to hear about. And in a moment of pure frustration, he finally lashed out, throwing her own struggles back in her face. The cruelest words escaped his lips, aimed at the very heart of her sacrifices. The judging eyes of the world seemed to close in around them. A heavy silence fell, the rain washing over the space between them. Her expression was shattered, the fight draining from her eyes, and her hand fell limp. A silent surrender to his bitter words. The space between them grows cold and vast, filled only by the falling rain. A wave of instant regret washes over him. He turns his back, promising to go home as he walks away, leaving his mother standing alone in the downpour, a solitary figure outside the restaurant. An ominous red symbol seems to bleed into the stormy sky above. He wanders aimlessly through the empty, rain-soaked streets. The weight of his words presses down on him with every step. Even the smallest creatures seem to bear witness to his misery. The memory of his own cruel words echoes in his mind, a venomous tirade born from his own suffocating pressure. He remembers the look on her face as she absorbed every blow. The realization of what he's done begins to sink in. His grip tightens on the umbrella she gave him, and a terrible thought begins to form. He sees her shattered expression again, her eyes filled with the pain he caused. The image of her profound sadness burns into his memory. The memory shifts to the sharp sting of a hand across his face, a physical blow that was nothing compared to the emotional one he delivered. Her heartbroken question hangs in the air, a final, devastating indictment. Spurred by a sudden gut-wrenching fear, he begins to run. A single whispered apology hangs in the rain-soaked air. An apology for his mother, whose heartbroken face is all he can see. An apology that becomes a desperate scream as he runs back through the storm. His feet pound the wet pavement, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. But in his haste, he stumbles, losing his grip on the umbrella. His face contorts in shock as the world seems to tilt beneath him. The red umbrella, a symbol of their broken connection, clatters into a dark alley. It lies abandoned in a growing puddle, swallowed by the downpour. Nearby, a small creature watches the scene unfold with indifferent eyes. Its croak is the only sound that breaks the rhythm of the falling rain. The memory fades, shifting to a small convenience store, a lone beacon of light in the storm. Inside, a group of men pass the night with cards and crude jokes, oblivious to the TV droning in the corner. A news report flickers across the screen, detailing a tragic accident from the night before. The anchor's voice continues, listing a string of recent calamities. Another life lost, a student drowned in the relentless storm. The broadcast explains the cause. The city's drainage systems have failed, overwhelmed by the deluge. Outside, the grim reality of the report plays out in a flooded alleyway. Cries for help echo through the downpour as people scramble in the rising water. Panic spreads as they realize their path is completely submerged and impassable. Even with rescue teams on the scene, the relentless rain and surging floodwaters create a scene of pure chaos. Amidst the chaos, his mother stands alone, her back to the world. Her face is a portrait of utter despair, a silent sob caught in her throat. Her hands clench the red umbrella, the last thing he left behind. Rescue workers try to offer words of comfort, promising that her son will be found. Nearby, a small creature watches the scene unfold. Its croak is the only sound that breaks the rhythm of the falling rain. But its call shifts into something unnatural, a distortion of reality itself. And Zuohui's last memory is of reaching for the light, a final desperate call for his mother as the water consumes him. His eyes fly open, snapping back to the horrifying present. He finds himself on his knees in the sterile white room, a rope dangling ominously from above. The full, terrifying reality of his situation comes crashing back, and he realizes with a jolt that he is not alone. Other faces watch him, each marked with their own number. A collection of strangers, all trapped in the same impossible predicament. His mind struggles to process the scene, the confusion overwhelming him. One of the others scoffs at his arrival, while Zuohui can only question what this place is. His hand instinctively goes to the coarse rope around his neck, tracing it upwards in dawning horror. He looks up to see countless ropes disappearing into the blackness of the ceiling. A fresh wave of terror washes over him. His confusion finally erupts into a frantic panic, demanding to know what's happening and why he's here. Another player's memory flashes, a lone figure walking through a desolate, rain-slicked street, questioning how he ended up here. Back in the sterile room, his panic joins a chorus of confusion and fear from the other captives. He rushes to stop Zuohui's frantic struggles, warning him against touching the rope. The man, Cheng Jilin, insists that fighting the restraint will only put him in greater danger. But Zuohui's terror is absolute, his only instinct to tear the noose from his neck. Nearby, two others watch with grim resignation, one explaining the futility of escape. The youngest of them, a girl named Lu Zi, shares in their collective amnesia. From above, the scene is a cold, geometric prison, each person tethered to an unseen fate. Zuohui collapses, gasping for air as the rope constricts with his every panicked movement. A man named Chen Shuqiang looks on with contempt, tired of the newcomer's pointless struggle. His own frustrations have been echoing off the walls for an hour, a fact pointed out by a calm, dark-haired woman. Lan Sha, player 4, believes their only option is to wait for their captors to reveal the rules of the game. Her words seem to spark a flicker of recognition in Chen Shuqiang's eyes. He approaches her, a strange sense of familiarity passing between them. But any connection is severed by the sound of Zuohui's desperate choking. The boy claws at his throat, the pain becoming unbearable as the rope tightens its grip. Xing Zhulin pleads with him to stop, his face etched with genuine fear for what will happen if he doesn't. Suddenly, a single red die bounces into the center of the room, capturing everyone's attention. Zuohui and Xing Zhulin can only stare, their panic momentarily replaced by confusion. And just as mysteriously as it appeared, the rope around Zuohui's neck loosens, dropping him slightly. The world fractures into a chaotic cascade of red dice, tumbling through an endless, sterile void. Cries of shock and confusion erupt from the captives as the surreal downpour begins. Zuohui can only stare upwards, his mind struggling to comprehend the impossible scene. From a swirling cloud of darkness, a bizarre figure emerges with a booming, cheerful greeting. The other players look on, their faces a mixture of shock, fear, and utter disbelief. Zuhi's frozen in place, his eyes wide with a dawning, surreal horror. The strange entity welcomes them to a place it calls the Netherworld. It introduces itself with a wide, unsettling grin as their new master, Yama, the symbol of their new reality. 4 simple red dice. Master Yama repeats its grand introduction, a playful yet menacing host. Its cartoonish face looms closer, beckoning them into its twisted game. The invitation hangs in the air, an offer they have no power to refuse. Zuohui tries to process the impossible words, his mind reeling from the revelation. He questions the nature of their captor, wondering if it's a mere projection or a toy, or if the creature before them is terrifyingly real. With a grand, sweeping gesture, the entity prepares to begin. It directs their attention to the ceiling, where the rules of their fate are about to be revealed. The game is simple. Each player will roll a die in order, and the first to roll a 6 will be declared the winner. The others listen intently, their survival now hinging on a simple game of chance. But it's the final rule that catches Zuohui's breath. The winner gets to leave. Master Yama cheerfully announces that with so many new people, it's time to play a simple game. But Chen Shuqiang erupts in a furious outburst, refusing to participate. He unleashes a torrent of questions, demanding to know who they are and how they were brought to this place. He challenges the true mastermind to stop hiding behind a childish puppet and face them directly. From the smoke of a cigarette, a calmer voice cuts in. Lan Sha dismisses the entire setup as a waste of time, demanding to know their captor's real motive. She coolly offers to pay any price for their freedom, assuming this is all about money. The others join in, their patience wearing thin. Through it all, Master Yama's unsettling smile remains fixed. Cheng Zhilin tries to warn them, his voice trembling as he insists they are all in grave danger. His plea is met with scorn as Chen Shuqiang accuses him of being part of the charade. Cheng Zhilin can only stammer, unable to defend himself against the accusation. Master Yama's cartoonish face looms closer, its expression unchanging. It floats down with open arms, insisting that the game will be fun for everyone. But Chen Shuqiang continues his defiant tirade, refusing to be intimidated by a mere toy. The other players can only watch in silence, their own fears reflected in their eyes. The entity's cheerful facade finally drops, its silence more menacing than any threat. A subtle shift in its expression hints at the darkness beneath the mask. A single, playful sound breaks the tense silence. With a chilling sense of finality, it seems to agree to move things along. A grim penalty is announced for the two who defied the game. Zuhui watches, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. With a cheerful farewell, Master Yama unleashes a swift and brutal consequence. In a horrifying instant, the two defiant players are simply gone. The shocking reality of their fate is reflected in Zuohui's terrified gaze. He stands frozen, the coarse rope a chilling reminder of his own mortality. His mind struggles to process the sudden violent end of two lives. A silent scream builds behind his eyes, trapped by the impossible scene. The entity's playful words echo in the blood-soaked silence. The other captives can only stare, paralyzed by the same horrifying realization. Master Yama's excitement only grows, a gleeful cry cutting through the terror. Its cat-like face contorts into a playful, yet deeply unsettling expression. Panic finally breaks the silence as the remaining players scream in pure terror. Their desperate cries for help are lost in the sterile white room, while Zuohui remains locked in his shock. His gaze falls to the floor, now stained with the grim evidence of what just happened. Disbelief wars with the horrifying truth before him. Zuohui collapses, gasping for air as he denies the reality of their situation. He clings to the desperate hope that this is all just a nightmare. A frantic plea to wake up echoes in his mind. A command to break free from this horrifying dream. But his desperate plea is answered only by a glowing red timer, counting down from 60. From above, Master Yama announces that the game is about to begin. Its cheerful voice cuts through the silence, calling out Zuohui's name. It confirms his new identity, the one branded on his forehead. Player number 1. The entity's unsettling grin widens, as it formally invites him to roll the die. A strange new rule appears, juxtaposed with a memory of a man gambling, a life lived by chance. The truth of the two defiant players is revealed through a news report of their real-world deaths. Another player's memory surfaces, a mind clouded with amnesia and confusion. He remembers only walking through the rain, on his way to work before everything went black. The youngest captive recalls her simple plan to get home, a life cut short. And Zuohui is left kneeling, the same impossible question echoing in his own mind. A single devastating thought cuts through the chaos. He's already dead. The two people who vanished weren't just punished, they were sent back to their moment of death. Their end was swift, brutal, and absolute. His mind rejects the horrifying truth, desperately clinging to the idea that this is all a nightmare. But the cartoonish figure of their captor remains, a constant, surreal presence. A silent scream echoes in his mind, a desperate plea to awaken from this hell. Yet he remains on the cold, hard floor, trapped in this horrifying reality. And the Game Master's voice cuts through his terror, calling for Player 1 to begin. The other players watch in stunned silence, their own fates hanging in the balance. Fear is etched on every face, the reality of their situation undeniable. Master Yama's voice booms through the room, singling out Zuohui by name. Stunned, he can only question how this creature knows who he is, his last hope of it being a dream fading away. The entity responds with a bizarre, cat-like sound, mocking his terror. Its command is simple, an invitation to play as the horrifying truth solidifies in Zuohui's mind. With no other choice, a single red die is cast across the sterile floor. It tumbles to a stop, landing on the number 3. In an instant, a crimson stain appears in the air. Another player is gone, a brutal consequence for an unlucky roll, leaving Zuohui to witness the grim result. A faint, chilling smile plays on someone's lips. The man in the cap panics, urging Zuohui to just roll a 6, believing it's their only way out. But Zuohui looks up, a cold resolve hardening his gaze as he confirms the rules of his own survival. The other man's eyes widen with terror. He grabs Zuohui, screaming at him to stop wasting time and just roll the die. A single desperate thought cuts through the noise. A refusal to die here. All the while, Master Yama watches with its fixed, painted-on smile. Its expression twists into a predatory grin, enjoying the unfolding chaos. The remaining captives can only look on, trapped in a state of pure dread. The Game Master's eyes narrow, a silent promise of what's to come for the losers of its game. A single desperate thought forms in Zuohui's mind. A fierce refusal to accept his fate. He stares into the face of his bizarre captor, and silently vows that he will not die here. In his eyes, the reflection of this impossible reality swirls. But Master Yama cuts through his defiance, questioning who gave him the right to even think. The other players can only watch, their own terror mirrored in their expressions. The entity looms over Zuohui, a silent, absolute authority. The threat hangs heavy in the air, a promise of death for any disobedience. Zuohui's resolve crumbles into fear, a stammered apology escaping his lips. The thought of his own demise consumes him. It becomes a frantic, silent scream in his mind. But the creature responds with a burst of manic glee, answering the question he never dared to ask. It confirms that if he wins, not only will he be free, but everyone will be allowed to leave. The remaining captives listen, their survival now tied to his next move. Zuohui can hardly believe it, wondering if escape could truly be so simple. But with no other options, he accepts his role in this twisted game. Reaching for the die, he understands the choice is simple: play or perish. His entire focus narrows to a single desperate outcome. With a flick of his wrist, he sends the die tumbling, his hopes riding on the number 6. His eyes are locked on the tumbling die, his entire future held in its spin. It settles on the number 5, a result announced with gleeful excitement by their captor. The other players can only stare, the number echoing in the tense silence. Zuohui's mind races, wondering what terrible consequence this roll will bring. For a moment, nothing happens. The die sitting innocently on the sterile floor. Then, without warning, the very ground beneath them begins to shift. A wave of confusion and terror washes over the captives. Their eyes widen, unable to comprehend the new development. Suddenly, the ropes pull taut, hoisting them all screaming into the air. Their feet leave the ground, their fates now hanging by a thread. The coarse fibers dig deeper, constricting with brutal force. Zuohui claws desperately at his throat, his body convulsing. A silent, desperate plea for help is etched on his face, lost in the agony. Around him, the others share his torment, their own struggles just as futile. From below, 5 massive red pillars begin to rise from the floor. A new horrifying stage for this twisted game is set. The pressure becomes unbearable, a guttural sound escaping his lips. Master Yama floats beneath a new timer, its countdown beginning from 59. The seconds tick away, each one an eternity of suffering, and the entity simply watches, letting out a playful sound as their torment continues. Through a veil of messy hair, his eye reflects the sheer terror of his predicament. Master Yama mocks his struggle, reminding everyone that the clock is ticking for the next player. As consciousness begins to fade, his mind retreats to a place of comfort. A desperate hand reaches out through the darkness of his memories. He sees the warm, smiling face of his mother, a beacon of love in this cold hell. A silent, agonizing scream for her tears through his suffocating throat. But reality is cruel. While others have found footing on the rising pillars, he is left dangling in the void. The rope bites deeper into his neck, choking off his plea for help. Tears and sweat mingle on his face as the world begins to blur into a painful haze. Suddenly, a voice cuts through the panic, urging him to look to his left. The man in the cap screams desperately, pointing out the platform that could save him. He dangles precariously close to salvation, yet seems unable to bridge the gap. But the boy is too far gone. His senses dulled by the lack of oxygen, unable to hear the lifeline being thrown to him. His mind goes blank, the darkness encroaching on his vision as his strength fails. The red timer looms overhead, marking the seconds of his life that slip away while the entity watches with glee. To the Game Master, this life-or-death struggle is nothing more than amusing entertainment. His body twitches instinctively, fighting a losing battle against gravity. Yet, deep within the fading consciousness, a spark of defiance ignites. His hands claw feebly at the noose, refusing to let go of the life he almost threw away. A final silent scream of refusal echoes in his mind. He will not die like this. A guttural scream erupts, catching even the twisted Game Master off guard. Zuohui's eyes bulge with the sheer force of his will to survive. The empty ropes beside him stand as grim reminders of the fate he is fighting against. Every muscle strains, his mind screaming a single incomplete thought. A hallucination of his mother flickers before him, her smile clashing with his desperate internal plea to live. His body thrashes violently in the air, a macabre dance of survival against the tightening noose. An agonizing roar tears from his throat, a rejection of death in its rawest form. The red digital counter ticks down relentlessly, indifferent to his suffering. His vision begins to fail, the world narrowing to a pinprick of pain and darkness. Memories of the drowning floodwaters merge with his current suffocation, a hand reaching into the void. The fear of death consumes his final thoughts as the darkness takes hold. Finally, his strength gives out and his hand falls uselessly to his side. The frantic kicking ceases, leaving only the sway of dirty shoes in the sterile air. Silence reclaims the room as his silhouette hangs motionless against the white void. The youngest player watches in horror, tears streaming down his face at the sight of another fallen comrade. Master Yama observes the stillness, perhaps disappointed that the entertainment has ended so soon. Gravity claims its prize, the rope holding the full weight of a life seemingly extinguished. But suddenly, a blur of motion cuts through the stillness from the nearby pillar. The man in the cap lunges from his platform, grabbing Zuohui in a desperate embrace to hoist him up. Pain explodes through his fading consciousness, a white-hot agony as air fights to return to his lungs. A blinding light envelops his mind, accompanied by the rhythmic thumping of a fading heart. Within the glow, the gentle, smiling face of his mother appears to welcome him home. Her expression is filled with a warmth that tempts him to surrender to the peace of death. But a sudden, agonizing jolt shatters the illusion, replacing the light with searing pain. The sensation of drowning returns, his hand reaching out desperately as the darkness threatens to swallow him whole. A voice crashes through the void, a sharp command demanding that he wake up. The man in the cap roars with exertion, his face contorted as he fights to pull Zuohui back from the brink. He grips the boy tightly, screaming that he is not allowed to die here. With a final heave, Zuohui is hauled onto the pillar, coughing violently as oxygen floods his starved lungs. The older man gasps for breath, trembling with the sheer relief of having saved a life by a mere thread. Zuokai hangs his head, the rope slack around his neck as the impossible truth sinks in. He is still alive. His savior offers a breathless, encouraging smile, urging him to keep fighting. Behind his glasses, Zuohui's eyes widen, the shock of survival slowly replacing the terror of death. A moment of stillness settles over the red pillar, the immediate danger finally past. Tears of overwhelming gratitude well up in Zuohui's eyes, blurring his vision once more. He leans into the stranger who saved him, his heart overflowing with a silent thank you. The man comforts him, assuring the trembling boy that he is safe now. Across the room, the young girl watches the rescue, her face softening with relief. But the reprieve is fleeting, as the ominous red timer ticks down to its final second. The counter hits 0, marking the end of the turn with a chilling finality. The gruesome round concludes with a cheerful declaration from the ceiling. Master Yama offers a twisted congratulation to those who managed to cling to life. But the creature's tone darkens, mocking those who weren't fortunate enough to make it. Confusion ripples through Zuohui and his savior, as the reality of the statement sinks in. A heavy silence falls over the blonde student, his gaze fixed downward in mourning. Their collective attention is drawn to the grim spectacle dangling beside them. Beside them, the girl covers her mouth, stifling a gasp of pure horror. Player 3 hangs motionless, his life extinguished by the cruel game. His limp form serves as a stark physical warning of the penalty for failure. The scene fractures, shifting to the real world where a commotion breaks out on a busy street. Onlookers gossip about a tragedy, a man driven to the edge by relentless workplace bullying. A bloodied ID card lies on the pavement, confirming the identity of the fallen office worker. Back in the white void, the coarse rope remains the instrument of their demise. The man in the cap lowers his gaze, the weight of the loss pressing down on him. That curse number 3, once just a label, now marks a permanent end. Zuohui covers his mouth, a wave of nausea and recognition washing over him. A quiet murmur of gratitude escapes their lips, acknowledging the fragile line between them and the dead. His savior stares at the hanging figure, realizing how easily their roles could have been reversed. Shaking off the paralyzing fear, he stammers out a vow against the encroaching darkness. His eyes harden with a fierce, shared determination to survive, no matter the cost. Zuohui turns to his savior, a desperate question forming on his lips about what the older man might know. But their brief moment of connection is shattered by a piercing, manic screech from the entity above. Master Yama gleefully announces that the reprieve is over, and the second round of their nightmare begins immediately. The creature's focus shifts to the young girl, player 2, demanding she take her turn at the cruel game of chance. A vision of the dice tumbling through the air flashes before them, defying gravity to pause on the coveted number 6. The girl freezes, realizing with a jolt that the laws of physics have been suspended in this twisted reality. Cold sweat runs down her face as the pressure of the moment threatens to crush her resolve. The game master's voice sings out her number again, a mocking reminder that her time is running out. She trembles uncontrollably, her gaze fixed downward as she fights back a rising tide of panic. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, she grips the die so hard her hand bleeds, flinging it forward with everything she has. Her silhouette stretches against the white void, a fragile figure casting her fate into the empty air. Zuohei and the man in the cap watch with bated breath, their own lives indirectly tied to the outcome of her role. The die bounces erratically, teasing them with high numbers before tumbling further along the invisible path. It finally settles on a 2, and the entity's face looms large, shouting the disappointing result with sadistic delight. Pure horror washes over all 3 players as the timer instantly begins its countdown. Without warning, the ropes snap taut, hoisting them violently into the air as the floor seems to drop away. They are left dangling once more, 3 figures struggling in unison against the suffocating grip of the nooses. Their faces contort in agony, a collective silent scream as the air is choked from their lungs. The Game Master watches the suffering with wide, unblinking eyes, savoring the chaos it has unleashed. But below their frantic kicking, the red pillars begin to rise again, racing against time to offer a foothold. A wave of hopelessness washes over Zuo Hui, the thought that this is the end echoing in his mind. But fate offers a sliver of mercy as the red pillars ascend beneath the struggling girl. Her feet find purchase on the solid surface, granting her a reprieve from the suffocating rope. Collapsing in relief, she can only stammer out broken apologies to the others. Tears stream down her face as she begs for forgiveness for the terrible number she rolled. But the countdown continues its relentless march, indifferent to her remorse. For the others, the coarse rope digs deeper, turning every breath into a battle. Zuo Hui's face turns a sickly shade as panic and asphyxiation cloud his thoughts. Behind his fogged glasses, a frantic search for a solution begins. Suddenly, a violent thud against the wall breaks his concentration. The man in the cap swings his body with wild abandon, shouting for Zuo Hui to follow his lead. His eyes are narrowed in fierce concentration, calculating the physics of their survival. He uses the wall as a springboard, generating the momentum needed to reach safety. Zuo Hui watches through the haze of pain, realizing this is his only chance. Summoning his last reserves of strength, he drives his foot against the smooth surface. His body arcs through the air, a pendulum of flesh and bone driven by the will to live. The red pillar looms closer, a narrow target in the vast white void. His shoe scrapes against the edge, seeking a desperate hold. Hope flares in his chest as he believes he has finally bridged the gap. But his momentum betrays him, carrying him dangerously past the safety of the platform. But he doesn't fall into the abyss. Instead, a firm foot intercepts his descent. The man in the cap has swung his own body into the path, offering himself as a human stepping stone. The full weight of 2 lives now hangs from a single, straining rope around the older man's neck. Agony etches deep lines into his face as the coarse fibers bite mercilessly into his skin. With a roar that defies the suffocating pressure, he summons every ounce of remaining strength. Zuo Hui's eyes widen, realizing the magnitude of the sacrifice being made for him. Using his own body as a counterweight, the man launches the boy across the deadly gap. Zuo Hui soars through the white void, a desperate projectile aimed at salvation. His arms collide with the red pillar, wrapping around it in a frantic, death-defying embrace. He clings to the smooth surface, his heart pounding against the cold structure that marks his safety. Breathless and trembling, he looks back, the reality of his survival clashing with the cost. Even the twisted Game Master seems momentarily paused by this unexpected display of altruism. Scrambling for purchase, Zuo Hui hauls himself up the side of the pillar. His feet finally find the flat top, securing his place among the living. But his relief is instantly replaced by panic as he screams out for his savior. The man in the cap hangs alone in the void, his momentum spent, far from the safety he helped another reach. A look of absolute devastation fills Zuo Hui's eyes as the physics of the situation become clear. Tears mingle with sweat on the older man's face, a silent acceptance of his fate washing over him. Zuo Hui screams his name, a raw, tearing sound that echoes uselessly in the empty room. He leans dangerously over the edge, witnessing the tragic consequence of the man's final, selfless act. The physical toll of his sacrifice is immediate and brutal, agony etched into every line of the older man's face. The coarse rope bites mercilessly into his skin, choking off the very breath he just fought to save. Above them, the red timer continues its indifferent countdown, marking the seconds he likely doesn't have left. Zuo Hui watches in paralyzed horror, his hands trembling as the weight of the situation crashes down on him. The cruel instrument of their fate sits motionless, a silent mockery of the life hanging in the balance. The man in the cap stares into the abyss, a whispered denial escaping his lips as his strength begins to fade. Tears stream down his face, mixing with the sweat of his exertion as the darkness closes in. His body dangles helplessly in the white void, his hand reaching out for a salvation that is now out of reach. A guttural sob tears through his throat, a desperate plea to the universe that he is not ready to leave this world. His hand claws at the empty air, grasping for a future that is rapidly slipping away. The gesture merges with a silent internal scream, a manifestation of his overwhelming will to live. From the safety of the pillar, Zuo Hui extends a desperate hand, screaming for his savior to hold on for just one more moment. But the man's mind begins to drift, pulled back to a distant memory of a glowing screen. He sees a younger version of himself, sitting alone in the quiet solitude of a life left behind. His true identity surfaces through the haze, a man named Zheng Jilin, whose story began long before this room. He remembers the weight of a different uniform, the pride of a firefighter dedicated to saving others. The roar of flames fills his ears, accompanied by the frantic shouts of comrades urging him to retreat. The memory shifts to a lonely figure counting the years, believing that time in the real world has moved on to 2017. But the inferno returns, a wall of fire that separated him from the life he once knew. A bittersweet smile touches his lips as he reveals the heartbreaking truth. He has been trapped in this hell for 13 long years, wondering if anyone is still waiting for him. The fading consciousness conjures a vision of a small boy, sitting quietly before a glowing screen. It is a memory of the son he left behind, a silent figure in a world that kept moving without him. A wave of profound longing washes over him, a final confession of how much he truly misses his child. He recalls a simple pinky promise, a vow to return that now feels impossibly distant. The memory shifts violently, consumed by the roaring flames of the day that changed everything. The emblem of his duty shines brightly against the backdrop of the inferno. Despite the frantic warnings of his teammates that the building was empty, he refused to turn away. A phantom cry for help had pierced the roar of the fire, driving him toward the danger. His colleagues screamed for him to stop, their voices filled with fear for his safety. But he offered only a confident reassurance, convinced that he was invincible against the heat. With a brave smile, he promised them and himself that he would definitely return. The digital clock burned a specific time into his mind, a deadline he was determined to meet. His eyes held a fierce resolve to finish the job and make it home before 6 o'clock. The scene dissolves into a quieter moment, the hands of a wall clock marking the peaceful time before the call. He remembers answering the phone, duty calling him away from the sanctuary of his home. His wife's disappointed voice echoes, reminding him of the plans he was about to break. With a gentle, apologetic expression, he accepted the burden of his profession once again. Turning his back on the warmth of his family, he walked toward the door and the fate awaiting him. The image fractures between the red engine of his trade and the barefoot innocence of the life he was leaving behind. And his final, lingering memory is the feeling of his hand resting on his son's head, a silent goodbye he didn't know would be his last. A playful salute marks the beginning of his apology, a casual farewell to his son before heading to work. He assumes the role of a doting father, offering a reassuring smile to ease the goodbye. A specific time is set, a promise to be home by 6 o'clock sharp. The vow is sealed with the most sacred of contracts, a pinky promise. He points with absolute confidence, swearing that he will definitely return. His demeanor is lighthearted, a brave face put on to mask the dangers of his job. The serious face of his son watches him, waiting for the commitment to be fulfilled. He emphasizes that they will be together soon, just the two of them, reunited after his shift is over. He mimics the act of watching, setting the stage for their evening plans. The goal was simple and pure, to sit together and watch cartoons. The memory of his son's smile is the last thing he wants to hold on to. That interlocked finger represents a bond he never intended to break. But the image fractures, the warmth of the smile clashing with the sudden shock of reality. The hands drift apart, the promise left unfulfilled as fate intervenes. His desperate plea to wait is suddenly consumed by a wall of encroaching fire. The memory shifts to the heat of the blaze, where he carries a survivor to safety. But relief turns to horror as the woman realizes her child is still trapped inside. The burning building looms, a fiery tomb for the innocent life left behind. Ignoring his own safety, he turns back into the inferno, screaming for the lost child. His voice pierces the thick, suffocating smoke, calling out for anyone still trapped within the inferno. Panic sets in as his eyes dart frantically through the haze, searching for the source of the cry he heard. Through the roaring flames, he spots a silhouette in the room below, isolated by the fire. It is a child, huddled in the corner and trembling, completely cut off from escape. A moment of terrifying realization hits him as he assesses the collapsing structure. His teammates scream in pure horror, their voices cracking as the building begins to give way. They are forced to retreat, scrambling away from the intense heat and falling debris. Tears stream down their faces as they scream his name, begging him to turn back while he still can. But he makes his choice, wrapping his arms around the child to shield a life that had only just begun. The world dissolves into a chaotic swirl of fire and darkness as the ceiling collapses upon them. All that remains in the aftermath is a battered helmet, resting in the ashes of a hero's sacrifice. The clock on the wall strikes 6, the promised hour arriving without the father who swore to return. His son waits with unwavering trust, his eyes fixed on the door, expecting it to open at any moment. But the silence stretches on, the boy's expression slowly sinking into a quiet, confused sadness. He sits alone before the glowing TV screen, a solitary figure waiting for a cartoon partner who will never come home. The memory fades into a desperate, reaching hand, grasping for a future that was stolen by the flames. Reality crashes back with brutal force as he hangs in the white void, his body convulsing against the rope. Tears of pure desperation flood his eyes, a silent plea to the universe not to let his story end this way. His face contorts in agony, his soul screaming that he cannot die yet, not while that promise remains unkept. His face is a mask of tears and desperation, screaming internally that he cannot die yet. He has held on for 13 long years for the sake of the boy waiting for him. A single tear tracks down his cheek, fueled by the fierce desire to live again. He must go back, remembering the pinky promise and the person still waiting for him. Zuohai screams his name, urging his savior to hold on just a little longer. Driven by panic, Zuohoi swings his body back toward the dangling man. Luzi watches the desperate struggle, while Zuohoi gasps, trying to regain his breath. He pushes off the wall again, fighting the suffocating rope with renewed desperation. His hand claws at the wall, face contorted in pain and exhaustion. With a final, agonizing roar, he launches himself across the void. His body swings wildly, generating the momentum needed to reach the pillar. He manages to secure a hold, pulling himself up and desperately sucking in air. A flash of realization crosses his eyes as he understands the precariousness of his position. The danger is far from over and the clock is still ticking. Below him, Zheng Jilin hangs motionless, his strength finally gone. The rope holds him fast, a silent, brutal executioner. Zuohai screams his name again, begging him not to give up the fight. Zheng Jilin looks up, offering a gentle, apologetic smile as he whispers his final farewell. The memory of the pinky promise shatters, a heartbreaking admission that he cannot fulfill his vow. The red timer burns 20 seconds into the darkness, marking the final moments of the round. A single tear of regret and exhaustion tracks down his face. Zuhoi screams his name, a desperate final plea for him to hold on. The older man's eye closes slightly, accepting the inevitable end. Zuohai stares up, hearing the heartbreaking realization that his son would now be his age if he were to return. A gentle, final smile touches his lips as he lets go of the fight. Tears stream down his face, his last selfless wish for Zuohui to please live on. Zuohui's eyes widen in horror as the man whispers his final word of encouragement. The young girl watches the tragic scene unfold, while the game master observes with cold indifference. Zheng Jilin's body hangs limp, a silent, brutal testament to the game's unforgiving rules. The memory of the clock striking 6 returns, marking the hour the father failed to come home. A door opens in the memory, signaling the moment the son expected his father to walk through. The small boy sits alone before the glowing television, still waiting for the promised cartoon partner. Silence stretches around him, broken only by the sound of the TV. He sits patiently, his small figure radiating a quiet, confused sadness. Turning his head, he checks the empty space behind him one last time. The memory shifts to a smiling face, followed by the chilling revelation that all the time spent in the netherworld equates to mere milliseconds in the real world. The father's spirit lingers beside his son's silhouette, a silent, desperate plea hanging in the void. Zukai hangs suspended, the weight of the dying man's command to live settling upon him. His eyes snap open with fierce resolve, accepting the burden of survival. He looks at the motionless body beside him, the grim reality of the sacrifice made for his life solidifying his determination. Zuke gasped, fighting to pull air into his lungs as he struggled against the rope. He tried to call out the name of the man who had just sacrificed himself. The young girl, Lu Zi, also struggled on her pillar, calling out weakly. Zuohai reached out, desperately trying to shake the man's motionless body. Master Yama watched the scene, letting out a mocking, gasping sound. Overwhelmed by grief and the tightening rope, Zuohui choked out the man's name. He screamed the name of his savior, refusing to accept the finality of his death. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with sweat and fear. A raw, agonizing scream tore from his throat, fueled by despair. He slammed his fist and foot against the wall, trying to generate momentum. Body swinging wildly, he screamed his refusal to die here. The thought of his own demise was instantly rejected. He screamed a desperate vow that he would not let the sacrifice be in vain. Using the wall as a springboard, he launched himself back across the void. Every movement was a gasp of searing pain against the tightening noose. His hand stretched out, aiming for the pillar where the dead man hung. But a vision of Zheng Jilin appeared, warning him to stop before he put himself in greater danger. Ignoring the phantom warning, Zuohui grabbed the lifeless body, determined to pull it back. With fierce determination, he screamed for the dead man to hold on. The memory of his savior screamed back, urging Zuohui to wake up and focus on living. Clinging to the lifeless body, Zuohui screamed the man's name in denial. But the phantom image of his savior smiled, urging him not to give up so easily. Zuohui could only whisper the name, overwhelmed by grief and exhaustion. Tears streamed down his face as he begged the man to please not die. Hanging side by side, Zuohui apologized for his failure and desperately pleaded for his savior to hold on. Luza watched the tragic scene unfold, while Master Yama observed with the timer ticking down to 15 seconds. Zuohui clung tighter, his eyes squeezed shut against the agonizing reality. The timer dropped to 8 seconds as a final, heartbroken apology escaped his lips. His eye reflected the profound sorrow and regret of the moment. Looking up into the void, he refused to let go of the man who saved him. The memory of Zheng Jilin returned, his tearful face conveying a final, absolute command. The message was clear: he must survive. With fierce determination etched on his face, the phantom urged him to live. Zuohui's eyes snapped open, a blinding spark of resolve igniting within him. His hands tightened on the rope, accepting the desperate command to live. Pushing off the wall with a surge of adrenaline, he began to swing his body. The momentum carried him across the sterile white space. The red pillar rushed toward him, a solid beacon of survival. He slammed into the pillar, wrapping his arms around it with a desperate vow that he must survive. His grip was absolute, securing his place on the platform. A hand, strained and trembling, reaches out from the darkness. Zuohui, still reeling from the near-death experience, looks up at the floating, puppet-like entity. A hidden, glowing eye peers out from the shadows, emitting a soft, almost mocking sound. Sweat drips from Zuohui's face, his lips slightly parted in exhaustion and disbelief. The masked figure of Master Yama leans in, its painted expression fixed in a bizarre, cheerful mask. Zuohui's hand grips the edge of the platform, his voice strained as he questions the entity's nature and purpose. He demands to know how they were all brought to this terrifying place. The perspective pulls back, showing the vast, sterile room and the hanging figures, emphasizing the isolation. Master Yama's face fills the frame, its wide, manic grin suggesting a singular, cruel desire. The entity confirms that its only wish is to watch them perish one by one. The man in the cap, player 6, declares his refusal to let Zuohui die in vain. Zuohui, still reeling, looks down, tears mixing with the sweat of his ordeal. A shadowy figure looms over the girl. Player 2, as the countdown for her turn begins. Zuohui, marked with the number 1, steels himself with a fierce vow to survive. A close-up emphasizes the burning intensity in his eyes, reflecting his absolute will to live. The timer above flashes 0, signaling the end of the brief pause. Master Yama reappears with a cheerful, cat-like announcement that time is up for the previous round. The entity congratulates the survivors, Zuohui and the girl, while gesturing toward the next phase of the game. Zuohui and the girl are shown standing on their respective platforms, awaiting the next command. Master Yama focuses on player 2, noting that she has completed her turn in the last round. The unsettling silence was broken by the entity's declaration that it was time to continue. Master Yama cheerfully announced that it was player 1's turn to roll the die once more. Zuohui, still reeling from the near tragedy, watched as his hands hovered over the red cube. The die, a symbol of their arbitrary fate, sat waiting for its next command. The die tumbled across the floor, its movement echoing the frantic beat of Zuohui's heart. The young girl, player 2, spoke up, her voice trembling as she reminded them they were the only two left standing. She insisted with desperate conviction that they could not surrender to the malice of their captor. Zuohui's gaze hardened, reflecting the fierce resolve that he would not let this evil entity prevail. A looming figure, perhaps a memory or a projection of a future threat, seemed to watch over the girl. Another player, marked with a 6, appeared in a vision, his face etched with grim determination, demanding they all survive. The remaining 2 players, Zuohui and the young girl, stood poised on their platforms, dwarfed by oversized dice floating above them. Master Yama, in its grotesque opera-masked form, offered a feline sound of encouragement. The entity then wished them good luck with a playful, cat-like purr. Close-ups revealed the sheer terror etched onto the faces of both Zuohui and the girl. A single red die, bearing a solitary, watchful eye, seemed to mock their predicament. A massive red structure slammed down between the 2 remaining players, signaling the start of the next phase. Their wide eyes reflected the sudden, intense shock of this new development. Zuohui, looking up at the descending structure, seemed to grasp a crucial pattern related to the die roll. He realized that the number of rising columns would correspond exactly to the number rolled on the die. Furthermore, the precise placement of those columns mirrored the dots on the face of the die. The entity explained that the platform would materialize in the center of the room, while the girl, player 2, struggled on her rope. Zuohui's eyes widened with a sudden, sharp focus, absorbing the new mechanics of the game. The girl's feet lifted from the ground as the rope tightened, her body beginning to drop toward the floor. The entity declared that only one person would remain standing, emphasizing the deadly stakes. Zuohui's expression hardened, the terror momentarily replaced by a fierce determination to survive this new challenge. The girl's desperate sounds of distress were audible as she fought against the constriction around her neck. Master Yama, in its grotesque form, seemed to relish the impending doom, its attention fixed on the countdown. The timer flashed a final, terrifying number, signaling the immediate end of the girl's turn. The girl's body convulsed violently as the rope exerted its final, crushing pressure. Zuohui watched in horror as the girl's struggles ceased, her form hanging limp in the sterile air. Zuohui, fueled by a desperate surge of adrenaline, declared his intention to save them both and vowed they would survive. As he reached out, the girl beside him let out sounds of distress, while Zuohui himself struggled for air. The blonde girl, player 2, was clearly suffering, her breathing ragged and strained. Zuohui reached out a hand, attempting to offer comfort and reassurance to his companion. He managed to push her slightly away, urging her to move while he held on. The man in the cap, still hanging, insisted that no one could afford to die, emphasizing their shared need to survive. With a final, desperate surge, he brought a sharp object down, severing the rope holding the girl. A powerful kick against the wall propelled Zuohui forward, using the structure for leverage. The severed rope swung uselessly in the air, a stark reminder of the danger they just escaped. Zuohui's face, slick with sweat and tears, showed a grim focus as he fought his own restraint. Zuohui, still clinging to the dead man, remained silent for a moment, processing the girl's apology. Master Yama's grotesque, masked face peered down, its presence a constant looming threat. A close-up showed the girl's arm, still wrapped around Zuohui in a desperate, clinging embrace. Zuohui's eyes, wide with shock and exhaustion, stared back at the entity above. A sudden realization dawned on Zuohui as he processed the girl's words and the situation. The girl, player 2, offered a final, tearful apology as her own grip began to fail. Zuohui's own hand, gripping the dead man's rope, tightened as he processed the gravity of the moment. His mind screamed a silent command to wait, to hold on just a moment longer. The entity above seemed to mock his hesitation, its expression unchanging. Zuohui's gaze shifted from the dead man to the girl, a desperate plan forming in his mind. Zuohui questions the girl's actions as she clings to him, apologizing repeatedly. Player 2, weeping, embraces Zuohui tightly, overwhelmed by remorse and fear. A close-up shows the binding around the girl's wrist, a stark reminder of their shared predicament. The girl's distress escalates as she cries out her fear of dying. Zuohui struggles against the pressure, making choked sounds as he tries to push her away. A hand grips the coarse rope, the strain evident in the clenched knuckles. Zuohui's face contorts in agony, his eyes wide with a desperate plea to be released. The girl continues to apologize, her grip unwavering despite the shared suffering. Both figures writhe against the ropes, their desperate sounds filling the sterile air. The digital timer flashes a terrifying 40 seconds, marking the rapid approach of doom. The timer shows 39 seconds remaining as the puppet-like Master Yama expresses distress and apologizes. The entity's face contorts into a wide, unsettling expression, letting out a strange, drawn-out sound. A single piercing green eye emerges from the darkness, observing the scene with cold intensity. A close-up reveals the number 3 branded on the forehead of a captive, his eyes filled with anguish. A wide shot shows player 3 hanging motionless, while Zuohui and the blonde girl struggle nearby. A speech bubble conveys a desperate apology from one of the struggling figures. A clenched, bandaged fist strains against an unseen force in the darkness. Player 2, the young girl, cries out, begging for forgiveness as tears stream down her face. A close-up on a struggling mouth shows the sheer effort of trying to speak through the constriction. Zuohui's face is a mask of pain, tears and sweat mingling as he endures the tightening rope. The entity above reveals the grim fate of player 3, detailing the manner of his demise in the second round. In the sterile room, the girl, player 2, offers a choked apology while clinging to Zuohui, who is still struggling against his own rope. A distant, unseen eye emits a soft, almost mocking sound from the darkness. A close-up focuses on the anguished face of a captive marked with the number 3, now lifeless. A wider view shows the dead body of player 3 hanging still, contrasting with the desperate struggle of Zuohui and the girl. A speech bubble conveys a final, desperate apology from one of the figures still fighting for air. A bandaged fist strains in the darkness, symbolizing a struggle against an unseen force. Player 2 cries out again, tears streaming as she begs for forgiveness for her role in the tragedy. A tight shot on a struggling mouth shows the immense effort required to speak through the constriction. Zuohui's face is a mask of pain, tears and sweat mingling as he endures the tightening rope. The instructor confirms understanding as the class responds affirmatively, ready to begin the lesson. A student interrupts the class, calling out to the blonde girl who appears withdrawn. Another student questions the interruption with a brief acknowledgement. The first student presses on, asking if the blonde girl heard about the events from 2 days prior. Other students are distracted, taking photos and ignoring the unfolding conversation. The blonde girl asks what happened, while another student demands quiet. The first student reveals that the girl was subjected to bullying once more. The second student confirms hearing the details of the incident. The grim details continue, describing how the victim was stripped bare. The final, devastating detail is shared. Photographs were taken of the humiliation. The scene shifts abruptly to a bright, sunlit public swimming pool, a stark contrast to the sterile white room. A foot with dark nail polish hovers near the edge of the pool, a small sound indicating a sudden presence. The blonde-haired boy, looking downcast, is confronted by a girl who questions if his dyed hair was an attempt to fit in with their group. A group of girls, dressed in dark clothing, surround him with mocking expressions, calling his appearance cheap and disgusting. The lead girl leans in close, her expression intense, demanding he speak up after his earlier boldness. A sharp sound punctuates the moment as the girl forcefully grabs his face, demanding an answer. He weakly denies any wrongdoing, his voice barely a whisper, stating there is no relationship between him and the class president. He tries to explain that they are just classmates, clarifying that he only sought help with a few math problems. The shadowy figures laugh at his pitiful defense, declaring that his reputation is beyond saving, even with a symbolic cleansing. A close-up reveals the cold, hard stare of the lead girl, her eyes conveying utter disdain. A dark-lipped figure calls out with a mocking greeting. The dark-haired girl presses the blonde boy, asking if he knows how to swim, to which he weakly admits he does not. The scene shifts to a stark, empty swimming pool area, where a few figures stand near the edge. A sign indicating Mode 2 is visible as the girl cheerfully agrees to proceed. The blonde boy's eyes are wide with mounting fear and distress. The group stands by the water, the girl commanding him to jump. The lead girl smiles cruelly, stating that if he jumps, they will finally believe him. He stammers his inability to swim, looking back and forth in confusion. His expression shifts to one of utter shock as he realizes the gravity of the situation. The girl repeats her command to jump with forceful emphasis as the blonde boy is shoved toward the water. The blonde boy thrashes violently in the water, desperately crying out for aid as the girls watch from above. The lead girl's hand gestures in a mocking peace sign as the boy struggles beneath the surface. A figure, perhaps a teacher or supervisor, questions the group about what they should do next. One of the onlookers recalls the instructor's warning against rescuing people, leading to agreement and laughter. The boy resurfaces momentarily, his face contorted in a final desperate plea for help before sinking again. He surfaces one last time, his mouth open in a silent scream for assistance. The water churns violently as the boy disappears beneath the surface, met only by the word "no" from the onlookers. The scene plunges into darkness, the only visual being the violent disturbance of the water. Submerged in the cold blue, the boy covers his face, the weight of his impending end crushing him. Bubbles rise around his face as the internal thought screams the refusal to die. A solitary pale arm stretches out into the infinite blackness dotted with faint specks. Submerged in the crushing blue, the boy's silent internal scream echoes. He does not want to die. A close-up shows a figure whispering a profound expression of regret. Around the struggling figures, apologies and pleas not to die echo from multiple voices. A bizarre, abstract image suggests a distorted, perhaps masked face observing the scene. The blonde girl, player 2, weeps uncontrollably, expressing her fear and apology. Zuohui, player 1, stares with fierce, determined eyes, sweat beading on his brow. A tight shot focuses on the coarse rope constricting the neck, emphasizing the physical pressure. Text panels appear, explaining the two ways one can perish when suspended by a rope like this. The first method of death is detailed: acute cerebral ischemia, leading to unconsciousness within seconds. Player 2, the girl, desperately reaches out as the number 2 is highlighted near her. The two figures are violently suspended, the text confirming the second method of death. Cervical vertebra fracture. The man who was player 3 is shown weeping, his brief struggle noted as only 3 seconds long. Master Yama reappears, its masked face leering as it addresses Zuo Hui, noting his superior endurance. The timer above Zuo Hui flashes 31 as he struggles and gasps for air. Zuo Hui lets out a strained, choking sound, his body fighting the constriction. He grits his teeth, exhaling a cloud of vapor as he fights to hold on. Both Zuo Hui and the girl are heard struggling, demanding release from the suffocating ropes. The girl cries out, begging for release and screaming in distress. Zuo Hui screams for the girl to let go of him, while she sobs out an apology. Zuo Hui, struggling under the weight of the girl clinging to him, desperately pleaded for her to release him, his own breath failing. Player 2, sobbing uncontrollably, apologized profusely, admitting her fear and her unwillingness to die. The strain on the rope holding the girl was visible as she refused to let go, her grip tight. A stark black and white panel emphasized the violent struggle, punctuated by shouts to let go. The girl continued her desperate pleas and apologies, clinging to Zuo Hui as they both choked. Zuo Hui's face contorted in raw agony, his eyes bulging as he screamed for release. Another cry of distress erupted as the two figures swung precariously from the ceiling. The girl wailed her apologies, her terror palpable as she held on tight. The physical struggle intensified, both figures writhing against the suffocating restraints. A final, desperate attempt to break free was made as the scene dissolved into chaos. Player 2, the girl, was overwhelmed by terror, begging and pleading for the torment to stop. The memory flashed back to a dark, oppressive environment where she was being physically assaulted by shadowy figures. One figure demanded to know why she refused to share her exam answers, calling her a derogatory name. Another figure demanded to know where the breakfast he requested was, showing aggression. A third figure accused her of seducing a boyfriend, further escalating the verbal abuse. Others mocked her appearance, taking pictures of her humiliation as they urged her to take the abuse quickly. The memory culminated in a desperate act of self-harm, a hand holding a utility knife to a wrist. A silent, internal scream of refusal accompanied the image of the blade pressing against the skin. Player 2's face, marked with the number 2, contorted in a final agonizing plea for them to stop what they were doing to her. Another figure screamed for release, their face contorted in a desperate struggle against an unseen force. Player 2's face is a mask of pure, tearful terror as the rope tightens around her neck. Zuohui watches in horror as the girl is pulled upward, entangled with the body of the man who saved him. A close-up on the girl's eyes shows the final moments of consciousness fading away. The memory flashes back to the sunlit pool, the blonde boy struggling in the water, his final plea unheard. The image of the submerged boy's silent scream is juxtaposed with the girl's current agony. The coarse rope constricts Player 2's throat, the physical pressure overwhelming her. An X-ray view reveals the devastating fracture occurring in the cervical spine, confirming the second method of death. The girl's silhouette hangs motionless, her struggle abruptly ended by the game's cruel mechanics. The digital timer above them flashes a stark, glowing 10, signaling the end of the round. Master Yama's presence looms, its masked face observing the finality of the second player's demise. Master Yama's grotesque masked face seemed to express a strange, almost satisfied glee. Zuohui, still reeling from the near-death experience, looked down, his face slick with sweat. The blonde girl, Player 2, hung lifelessly, her expression frozen in eternal sorrow. Zuohui's gaze drifted to the motionless silhouette of the man who saved him. Player 6. A profound sense of loss washed over him as he realized the sacrifice made for his survival. The memory of Zheng Zhilin's final tearful command to live echoed in his mind. Zuohui's hand instinctively reached out toward the hanging figure of the man who gave him a chance. The girl's limp form, marked with the number 2, served as a chilling reminder of the game's cost. Zuohui's eyes, though filled with grief, held a renewed, fierce spark of determination. He understood now that survival meant embracing the cruelty of this place, a truth that settled heavily upon him. Submerged in the dark water of his memory, Zuohui struggles against the crushing pressure. A piece of white fabric, perhaps a ribbon or bandage, drips black liquid as it falls away from a hand. Black liquid continues to stream from the wrist, where a faint circular mark is visible. The digital timer glows a menacing red, displaying the number 7. Zuohui looks up at the sterile ceiling tiles, letting out a ragged gasp for air. Close on his face, sweat and tears mix as he struggles, the number branded on his forehead visible beneath the blood-like streak. His face is a picture of utter exhaustion and pain, another gasp escaping his lips. The timer drops to 5, accompanied by the internal thought that he already cannot breathe. A tight shot on his mouth shows his lips clenched, fighting the urge to give up. The timer ticks down further, now displaying the number 4. His mind felt like it was dissolving into nothingness. The digital timer above him starkly displayed the number 3. He acknowledged the complete depletion of his remaining energy. His gaze dropped, a faint whisper of his mother's name escaping his lips. The memory of the man in the cap echoed, a fierce command to survive no matter what. He internally fought the urge to surrender, realizing he could not give up. Yet, the thought lingered. If he gave up, the pain would finally cease. He pictured his own silhouette hanging, wondering if the suffering would finally end. The timer ticked down to 2, the final moments of this agonizing phase approaching. A ragged, desperate breath escaped him, a sound of pure physical exertion. A ragged breath escapes, and in the darkness, a familiar spectral figure appears, prompting a choked inquiry about his mother. His mother's face is visible, though her expression is one of deep sadness, prompting him to ask why she is crying. His own terror surfaces as he questions if his impending death is the cause of her sorrow. A stark, glowing red numeral 1 dominates the black screen, marking his identity. He cries out a desperate plea for his mother not to cry as his body hangs suspended. The silent command echoes again, a desperate internal plea not to weep. The digital counter finally hits 0, signaling the end of the countdown. His silhouette hangs motionless against the stark white background. A closer view of the back of his head shows the messy, strained hair. The background explodes into a violent red as a fierce internal declaration rings out, "He absolutely will not die." Master Yama's exaggerated expression announced that time was up with a loud, almost feline cry. The entity then cheerfully congratulated Zuohui for being the sole survivor, marveling at his success. With another playful sound, the master beckoned him, declaring the next round had commenced and demanding he roll the die. A close-up on Zuohui's face, now wearing dark glasses, showed a single red mark on his forehead. His mind raced, questioning what action he was supposed to take now. He realized with dread that if he failed to participate in this round, he might not survive to the next. A silhouette of a hand holding a red die, showing the number 3, emphasized the precariousness of his situation. Zuohui exhaled sharply, the visible vapor showing the strain he was under. He looked down at the rope around his neck, silently questioning if there was any way to avoid failure. Master Yama's masked face reappeared, calling out Zuohui's name again. A woman winks, questioning what Zuohui should do next. The thought surfaces that he must roll a 6 without fail. A standard die tumbles across the sterile surface. A close-up on an eye shows intense focus amidst the surrounding grayness. A board game scene appears with dice rolls, showing a 6 being called out twice, indicating a repeated success. A younger Zuo Hui, aged 8, screams in disbelief, questioning how a 6 was rolled again. A woman, identified as Zuo Lin, aged 28, playfully claims genius as the third plane takes flight on the board. The young Zuo Hui refuses to believe it, demanding another roll because he didn't see the first one. Zuo Lin winks again, urging him to keep his eyes open this time. A large dark hand presents the die, commanding the boy to look closely. Zuo Hui's eyes darted around, wide with a mixture of confusion and lingering terror. A slight, almost imperceptible smile played on the lips of the entity before him. The memory of the previous game dissolved as the entity acknowledged him with a cheerful affirmation. A small exclamation of surprise escaped the young boy kneeling before the figure. Zuo Hui looked up, his expression one of bewildered questioning. The die, now back in the memory sequence, showed a clear 6, prompting an outcry that it shouldn't count. The boy in the memory vehemently protested the roll, claiming it was cheating and against the rules. The dark-haired figure in the memory laughed heartily, asserting that the 6 was valid and not a rule violation. The narration cut through the memory, describing an infallible method of setting a 6. Zuo Hui looked up at the ceiling, the number 1 branded on his forehead glowing ominously. Master Yama cheerfully addresses Zuo Hui as student, acknowledging his past. Zuo Hui, eyes burning with intensity, demands the die from the entity. The puppet master mocks his survival, suggesting he thought Zuo Hui had already perished. The entity warns him this might be his final chance to roll the die, wishing him luck with a playful meow. Zuo Hui lets out a strained sound of exertion as he grips the die. A hand reaches out from the darkness, presenting the red die. Zuo Hui reaches out toward the entity, their hands almost touching in the sterile space. The entity's shadowy hand holds the die, waiting for Zuo Hui to take it. A large pale hand descends, hovering over the shadowy claw holding the die. The large hand gently places the die into the dark, clawed hand. A pale, stitched hand carefully places the red die into a shadowy, clawed grip. Zuo Hui's eye, shadowed by his messy hair, reflects the intense focus of the moment. The girl, player 2, offers a knowing wink, urging him to keep his eyes open and watch closely. Master Yama lets out a playful, questioning meow as it observes the exchange. The shadowy hand now firmly holds the die, presenting the number 6. The die, clearly showing the coveted number 6, is held aloft. Zuo Hui's face, marked by a fresh streak of red, shows a fierce, determined glare as he shouts the number. The digital timer above them instantly snaps to 59 seconds, signaling the start of the next consequence. Zuo Hui, breathing heavily, stares at the timer, the weight of his successful roll settling upon him. The memory of the board game flashes again, showing a successful roll of 6 being confirmed. Zuo Hui confirmed the successful roll of 6 while the entity remained silent, observing him. Master Yama made a soft cat-like sound, its clawed hand holding the die that showed the winning number. The entity then questioned Zuo Hui, asking if he was attempting to challenge its authority. A harsh red digital timer immediately appeared, counting down from 54 seconds. A strange, elongated green object with a single black dot floated into view, an unknown element in this nightmare. Master Yama's masked face leaned in close, its glowing eye fixed on Zuo Hui, addressing him as student. The entity's multiple glowing eyes focused intensely on Zuo Hui, repeating the word you with growing emphasis. Zuo Hui's face, obscured by his hair and glasses, showed the strain of his ordeal. A cloud of sickly green vapor began to billow up from the floor, obscuring the lower half of the scene. Master Yama's voice boomed through the room, declaring triumphantly that Zuo Hui had won. Master Yama's voice boomed, congratulating Zuo Hui, student, on his victory. The entity declared that he had won the game, and the door to leave the room was now open. Looking up, Zuo Hui saw the other figures still suspended, and the entity proclaimed him the sole winner. The remaining captives, including the girl and the man who saved him, hung in silent testament to the cost of the game. The master announced the end of the game with a final playful sound, gesturing toward the survivors. The 2 remaining players were shown standing on their platforms, while the others remained hanging. Master Yama focused on player 2, noting her participation in the last round, before shifting attention back to Zuo Hui. The entity cheerfully declared it was time for player 1 to roll the die again. Zuo Hui, his hands hovering over the red cube, felt the pressure of the next roll. The young girl reminded them that they were the last 2, insisting they must not yield to their captor's malice. Zuo Hui lets out a ragged gasp, touching the raw skin around his neck in disbelief. He slumps down, the exhaustion of the ordeal finally overwhelming him as he groans in pain. A declaration echoes from above, stating that the previous round has concluded. The blonde girl lies still on the floor, her ordeal having reached its final, tragic conclusion. A close-up on Zuo Hui's face shows the lingering shadow of fear mixed with sheer fatigue. The grotesque, masked figure of Master Yama reappears, its expression a mixture of amusement and anticipation. The entity confirms that the game is indeed over for the others, but not for the sole survivor. Zhao He looks up at the figure, his expression hardening as he processes the entity's words. The entity gestures toward the hanging figures, confirming that only Zuo Hui remains standing. Zhu Hui pushes himself up, his gaze fixed on the entity, ready for whatever comes next. The lifeless form of the man who saved him lay still, his face turned upward toward the void. Zhu Hui, still reeling, looked at the fallen player 6, whispering a tribute to the man called Da Shu. Master Yama's puppet-like form reappeared, cheerfully confirming that Da Shu had indeed returned to his own fate. The entity explained with a mocking meow that Da Shu had been in this place for a very long time. The scene showed the entity looming over the body of the deceased player in the sterile room. Zhu Hui's hands gripped the edge of the platform, a raw, desperate energy surging through him. A single, choked question escaped his lips, demanding to know the purpose of this torment. He questioned the nature of their captor, demanding to know what exactly it was. Zhu Hui's mind struggled to reconcile the horror, asking how he had arrived in this impossible location. The remaining captive, the young girl, echoed the sentiment, questioning why they were forced into such an insane game. Zhu Hui, still reeling from the horror, demanded to know the entity's true intentions. Master Yama, with its unsettling grin, cheerfully declared its desire to help them all. Zhu Hui scoffed at the offer, questioning the nature of this supposed assistance. The entity clarified its twisted goal, to help them experience the sensation of hanging. It further elaborated, asking if they wished to taste the feeling of despair. Zhu Hui could only manage a weak plea for help, his voice barely audible. Master Yama then posed a chilling question, asking if they wanted help to die a painful death. The entity's mouth opened wide, confirming with a playful denial that this was not its aim. With a booming declaration, Master Yama revealed the horrifying truth. They had already died. Zhu Hui looked up at the floating figure, his expression a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Zhu Hui, still reeling from the revelation, could only state his preference for death over this existence. Master Yama responded with a playful meow, its massive eyes dominating the frame. The entity then boomed that Zhu Hui had already died, punctuating the statement with another feline sound. Zhu Hui stared back, his mind struggling to process the creature's words, asking for clarification on what it meant. The entity urged him to think, to recall the truth of his situation. Zhu Hui demanded to know what he was supposed to remember, his confusion mounting. Master Yama insisted he remember, its face looming close to his own. The entity pressed him again, asking if he remembered yet. A close-up on the entity's features showed a strange, almost predatory focus. Zhu Hui's eye, wide with terror, reflected the surreal horror of the moment. A desperate hand reaches upward toward a spectral vision where the word mum burns in red above a question mark. Zhu Hui's face, magnified in terror behind his glasses, is overlaid with a smaller image of himself struggling against a red band. The memory splits, showing two figures running in the rain, one holding the red umbrella, before cutting to Zhu Hui at his restaurant job, receiving harsh instructions. A close-up on a young man's face, perhaps a classmate, is overlaid with aggressive red text. A montage of Zhu Hui's confrontation with his mother and his subsequent flight through the storm dominates the frame. The image focuses on his mother's face, wet with rain and etched with profound sorrow, her hands covering her mouth. Below her, Zhu Hui's terrified eyes reflect the image of the number 1 branded on his forehead. He utters a choked sound of disbelief, questioning if he has already died. Zhu Hui stumbles, letting out a sharp, painful gasp as another figure seems to emerge from his own body. A final, strained sound escapes his throat as he collapses toward the floor, where another figure lies still. The entity playfully confirmed that Zhu Hui had already died, accompanied by a feline sound. Master Yama floated above Zhu Hui, declaring that only the deceased could enter this room. The 0th law of the Yama was revealed. Only those who have died can enter, and they temporarily lose painful memories. Zhu Hui reacted with disbelief, denying the possibility of his own death. The entity reacted with shock to Zhu Hui's denial, insisting that this could not be true. Zhu Hui cried out in disbelief, questioning how he could possibly be dead. He desperately listed all the things he hadn't done yet: university, a job, caring for his mother, and wanting to go home. His anguish peaked as he screamed that his mother was still waiting for him. His face contorted in a final desperate cry about his mother still waiting. He questioned the point of his future aspirations, recalling an argument where someone else pointed out their own unfulfilled dreams despite education. Zhu Hui's memory flashes back to his cruel outburst, questioning the value of his mother's sacrifices. Tears stream down his face as he realizes the depth of the pain he inflicted. His mother's shattered expression haunts him as he whispers that she is still waiting. He collapses onto the floor, overwhelmed by the question of how he could have spoken such venom. A desperate internal plea screams that he cannot die like this, crying out apologies to his mother. He wonders how heartbroken she must be now, realizing he is the only one left in this nightmare. The grotesque, masked figure of Master Yama looms, its expression unreadable yet menacing. A single word hangs in the air, signaling a shift in the entity's demeanor. A dark silhouette appears, and the entity leans in close to the sole survivor. The question hangs heavy. Does Zhu Hui desire resurrection in the world above? Zuohui, still reeling, could only process the possibility of resurrection. Master Yama confirmed the possibility, explaining the path to return. The entity detailed the requirement. Win 100 games, one after the other. Winning 100 games would allow him to return to the moment just before his death. Zuohui questioned the reality of this promise, his eyes wide with desperate hope. The Xth law of Yama was displayed, stating that victory in 100 games allowed survival at the moment preceding death. Master Yama cheerfully reiterated that winning 100 games meant he could finally go home. Zuohui, overwhelmed, asked if this incredible claim was truly factual. The entity confirmed its statement with an enthusiastic, almost feline affirmation. Master Yama spread its arms wide, floating above the sole remaining survivor. Zuohui's eyes, wide with shock, reflected the terrifying realization of his solitary survival. He questioned the entity about leaving, asking where he was supposed to go in the outside world and what he needed to do next. Master Yama cheerfully informed him that he would know the answers upon arrival, requesting he leave so it could tidy the room. Zuohui's panic erupted again as he demanded to know what the next game would be. The entity cryptically replied that he would find out when he got there, urging him to depart. Zuohui pleaded for more information, his voice cracking as he begged the creature to wait. The entity's glowing green eye narrowed, its expression shifting to something cold and predatory. Zuohui slumped, his wide eyes reflecting the overwhelming exhaustion and despair of his situation. Master Yama's eyes bulged comically as it let out another playful sound. The entity insisted it needed to clean the room, issuing a final, dismissive instruction for Zuohui to leave. The sheer terror in Zuohui's eyes was more suffocating than the rope itself. Master Yama floated away, its temperament utterly unreadable, letting out a soft, questioning sound. Zuohui looked up, his own expression now a mask of grim realization. The mark on his forehead, still bleeding slightly, confirmed his identity as Player 1. Giant disembodied hands seemed to press down from above, emphasizing the oppressive atmosphere. Zuohui looked down at the motionless body of Dashu, the man who had saved him. He whispered the name Dashu, acknowledging the sacrifice made in the previous round. Zuohui vowed with fierce internal conviction that he would try his absolute best to survive. He clenched his fists, a silent promise echoing his determination. Standing tall over the fallen, Zuohui faced the darkness, ready for the next stage. Master Yama playfully urged Zuohui to depart so it could clean up the aftermath of the previous round. Zuohui's face remained grim, his expression unreadable as he processed the entity's dismissal. The sterile white room now held only the bodies of the fallen, a grim testament to the game's cost. Zuohui looked down at the motionless form of Dashu, the man who had sacrificed everything for him. A final, silent acknowledgement passed between the sole survivor and the man who bought him time. Zuohui then looked up at the looming, masked figure, his eyes burning with a new, cold resolve. The entity confirmed the path to freedom, 100 consecutive victories leading back to the moment before his death. Zuohui's gaze hardened, accepting the impossible burden of survival and the path laid before him. A figure, perhaps a memory of his mother, appeared in the distance, prompting a silent plea for him to wait. Zuohui turned his back on the dead, his face set in grim determination as he prepared for the next trial. Master Yama, in its floating, puppet-like form, seemed to dance against the white backdrop. The entity offered a final, playful encouragement, urging Zuohui to do his best with a feline sound. Zuohui stepped forward, his feet leaving the sterile white floor as he moved toward an unseen exit. He paused, looking back into the oppressive grayness, a flicker of hesitation crossing his mind. Zuohui voiced his uncertainty, admitting he had no idea what the next step in this ordeal would be. He called out to Master Yama, his voice strained with lingering fear and confusion. His eyes, wide behind his glasses, reflected the sheer terror of his predicament. The scene abruptly shifted, the sterile white room vanishing into a desolate, dark landscape under a stormy sky. Zuohui spun around, his arms spread wide in confusion, demanding to know where the room had gone. His expression contorted in shock, questioning the sudden, impossible change in environment. Zuohui found himself standing alone in a desolate gray landscape under a stormy sky, questioning where this place was. His mind struggled to grasp the sudden transition, sweat beading on his face as he questioned what was happening. Looming over him was a shadowy figure wearing a mask adorned with a crescent moon, its expression unsettlingly serene. A sudden violent jolt shook his head, the world blurring around him in a rush of motion. His eyes snapped wide open, a streak of red marking his vision as he stared intensely at the figure. A dark, sweeping motion suggested a swift, brutal action was taking place near him. He watched as a figure, perhaps the one who had just been standing, fell lifelessly to the cracked ground. The fallen body lay stretched out, a stark contrast to the dark, looming presence standing over it. The dark figure remained standing over the prone form, the desolate landscape filled with other shadowy figures watching. A chorus of voices from the surrounding shadows exclaimed that a new arrival was present. The memory of the steaming, braised spare ribs brought a flicker of hope, making him wonder if this was real. Zuohui's face lit up with a genuine, albeit brief, smile, recognizing the familiar dish. The scene violently shifted back to the red-drenched nightmare, showing a figure hanging in the kitchen. A massive, blood-red eye filled the frame, reflecting the silhouette of the hanged figure. Zuohui's face contorted in a silent scream, the horror of his reality crashing back over him. The entity above let out a playful sound, confirming the end of the previous round. The monstrous Master Yama then cheerfully announced the start of the next game, demanding Zuohui roll the die. Zuohui, still processing the death of the girl and Da Shu, felt the pressure of the next roll. The memory of the board game returned, showing a successful roll of 6 being confirmed by the entity. Zuohui, now wearing dark glasses, stared at the die, the number 3 visible on its surface. Zuohui, still disoriented, expressed a brief sense of relief upon seeing someone, despite his confusion. A hooded figure stepped forward, confirming that Zuohui was finally conscious. Zuohui's eyes widened in terror as he questioned the identity of the figures surrounding him. He recoiled, demanding to know who they were and warning them to stay away. His panic escalated as he shouted out, demanding to know where he was and how he arrived. The hooded figure offered a calming assurance that Zuohui was in a safe place. The figure then stated that they were in Spring City, a place teeming with life. Zuohui could only manage a bewildered question in response to the strange declaration. The man, identifying himself as Tang, the guardian of this place, introduced himself with a steady gaze. Zuohui repeated the names and titles, his mind struggling to process the information about Tang and Spring City. Zuohui, still reeling, questioned the meaning of wandering demons and what exactly had transpired. Tang explained that the wandering demons were terrifying monsters in the netherworld that hunted people for sustenance. He added that Zuohui had narrowly escaped death the previous day, saved only by their timely intervention. Zuohui's eyes widened in horror as he asked if everyone else present was also deceased. He pressed further, demanding to know if they all arrived in this world after dying, and if this was the second game. Tang laughed, confirming they were all in the same predicament, but dismissed the idea of a second game. Tang stated firmly that there was no second game and no need to play again. Zuohui erupted in disbelief, shouting about the lack of a second game and the promised resurrection after 100 victories. He exclaimed that winning 100 games was impossible, followed by a desperate query of, "What?" Tang calmly revealed that he had been there a long time, winning a few games by luck, but had never seen anyone win even 50 times. Tang questioned the possibility of an ordinary person enduring 100 such ordeals. He insisted that he and Zuohui were the same, both possessing a compelling reason to return. Tang reminded Zuohui that his dear mother must be waiting for him. Zuohui's eyes widened in shock, demanding to know how Tang knew about his mother. A close-up on Zuohui's eye showed the intensity of his sudden realization. Tang's expression remained calm, confirming that he was aware of Zuohui's past. He added that Zuohui must have suffered great pain before his passing. A magnified view of Zuohui's eye reflected the overwhelming confusion. The vision of his own suffocation flashed before him, prompting a choked affirmation of the pain. Zuohui cried out in affirmation, demanding to know how Tang possessed all this knowledge. Tang revealed that the cause of Zuohui's death must have stemmed from something that brought him unparalleled remorse. Zuohui's mind flashed back to the cruel words he spat at his mother, questioning the point of his future. Tang affirmed that Zuohui's own outburst was the source of his profound regret. Tang also knew that Zuohui had paid a heavy price for survival in that moment. Zuohui, looking utterly bewildered, could only stammer a question about how Tang knew so much. The sight of the other hanging figures, marked with their numbers, confirmed the grim reality. Zuohui's terror intensified as he realized the extent of Tang's knowledge. Tang gestured toward the hanging bodies, confirming they had all endured similar hardships. He explained that they were all adversaries of Yama, tenaciously rebelling against its control within the netherworld. Tang's steady gaze conveyed a shared understanding of their desperate situation. Zuohui stared at Tang, processing the shocking implication of rebelling against Yama. Tang confirmed their refusal to obey the entity's orders, choosing instead to seek alternative paths back to the living world. He declared with conviction that they had already achieved success in their defiance. Zuohui's shock was palpable as he demanded clarification on what Tang had just revealed. He pressed further, his voice strained, asking if they had truly discovered a method for resurrection. Tang met his gaze with unwavering certainty, affirming that he was speaking the absolute truth. Zuohui's eyes widened, reflecting the sheer intensity of the moment and the desperate hope dawning within him. Tang revealed that he had already assisted numerous others in returning from this place. Zuohui could only utter a sound of utter disbelief, questioning the veracity of the claim. Tang offered a slight smile, inviting Zuohui to direct his attention upward. Zuohui looked up, his expression a mixture of confusion and dawning hope. Tang, the man with the red headband, calmly asked if Zuohui could see the markings around them. Zuohui's eyes widened as he focused on the cavern walls, sweat beading on his face. He could only manage a stunned query about what those markings represented. Tang confirmed that those inscriptions represented everyone who had successfully returned. The vast, dark expanse seemed to be covered in countless names etched into the earth. Zuohai stared in disbelief, exclaiming about the sheer number of people who had made it back. Tang affirmed that all those people had indeed returned from the ordeal. Zuohai looked up toward the ceiling, his voice filled with desperate hope, asking if this was truly factual. Tang's calm demeanor remained as he confirmed the truth of his statement. Zuohai introduced himself, carefully explaining the characters of his name to the shadowy figure. The figure acknowledged the name with an observation that it was interesting. Tang then instructed Zuohui to carve his name onto the wall, promising resurrection as the next step. Zuohui reacted with wide-eyed shock, questioning if carving his name would truly lead to his return. The shadowy figure dismissed the idea with a soft sound, closing its eyes briefly. Tang then clarified the sequence, instructing Zuohui to carve his name first. The desolate, orange-hued cavern walls seemed to absorb the sound of their conversation. Following the carving, Tang offered Zuohui a bowl of steaming food, smiling warmly. Zuohui looked at the offered meal with confusion, questioning if there was food available. He politely declined the offering, stating that he was not hungry. The figure holding the bowl confirmed that the food was very delicious. They emphasized that sustenance was a precious resource in this barren wasteland, not something to be had daily, though replenishing energy was necessary for his weak body. A shadowy presence loomed behind the speaker, who then reminded Zuohui that he needed to recover quickly to return to his mother, who must be waiting in agony. The figure then excitedly announced that after eating, Zuohui would be taken to witness a resurrection. Zuohui reacted with a sharp intake of breath, questioning if resurrection was truly possible. He let out a strained huff, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning hope. With a surge of desperate energy, Zuohui agreed, his voice filled with the question of whether resurrection was truly achievable. He then rose to his feet, ready to follow the robed figures out of the small, warm enclosure. A close-up on one of the hooded figures showed a stern, shadowed face, observing the sole survivor. The cavern walls were covered in countless deep scratches, a silent testament to the many who had passed through this place. The robed figure inquired about the taste of the food, to which Zuohui responded with enthusiastic approval. Zuohui exclaimed that the meal tasted even better than the braised ribs his mother used to make. The robed man chuckled softly in response. He then announced that they were nearly at their destination, prompting an eager, "Okay?" from Zuohui. Zuohui's mind raced, questioning if true resurrection was actually possible, his heart pounding violently in his chest. A dark, abstract shape seemed to fall in the background, emphasizing the intensity of his internal turmoil. The robed figure's shadowed face appeared, a subtle, knowing smile playing on its lips as they reached the exit of the tunnel. The guide announced their arrival, pulling Zuohui's attention back to the present. Zuohui looked up, his expression a mixture of shock and apprehension as he stared into the bright opening. The exit framed a blindingly bright space, marked by strange calligraphic symbols on the archway. Zuohui's face, still bearing the marks of his ordeal, registered utter shock. A silent realization dawned on him as he processed the blinding light of the exit. He looked out at the desolate landscape, the stormy sky confirming the impossible transition. His mind screamed in confusion, questioning if this was another trick or the promised return. He looked down at the ground, seeing the stark, cracked earth beneath his feet. The figures surrounding him were cloaked in shadow, their presence unnerving. Zuohui's terror spiked as he noticed the figures were not welcoming but menacing. A figure in the distance seemed to be falling, a dark shape collapsing onto the ground. The surrounding shadows confirmed that this was not a place of peace, but a new arena of conflict. A massive blood-red symbol seemed to drip down from the stormy heavens, mirroring the mark on his forehead. A raw, agonizing scream tears from Zuohui's throat, a final rejection of the horror. The desolate, orange-hued cavern erupts in a sudden, blinding flash of light. A figure calls out to everyone, announcing the arrival of a savior. The crowd of shadowy figures erupts in fervent adoration, hailing their savior. One of the figures expresses overwhelming joy that their angel has finally arrived. The man with the red headband and Zuohui stand illuminated in the archway, presented to the masses. The crowd's ecstatic cries intensify, proclaiming the arrival of the angel. The sheer volume of the adoration washes over the cavern, a deafening wave of sound. Zuohui, utterly bewildered, questions the meaning of being called an angel. The man with the red headband confirms the title, stating plainly that Zuohui is their angel. The man with the red headband noted that it had been a long time since someone as young as Zuohui arrived here. He explained that the others were like him, humans who thirsted for resurrection, calling themselves reincarnators. Together, they had painstakingly built Spring City, supporting each other in their revolt against Yama. However, many comrades had fought for too long, becoming elderly, and the months had taken a great toll on their bodies. But Zuohui's youthful vitality, stemming from his adolescent life, allowed everyone to regain their vigor. He declared that Zuohui was like an angel representing hope. Zuohui was the embodiment of the future. He was the representation of resurrection itself. The crowd erupted, thanking Zuohui for gracing them with his presence, calling him their angel. They pointed out the sincere smiles on the faces of the elderly reincarnators. Zuo Hui, still reeling from the revelation, demanded to know the exact mechanism of their resurrection. A shadowy hand emerged from the darkness, gesturing toward the figures around them. The man with the red headband declared that resurrection was achieved through a truthful heart and the soul. The guide urged Zuo Hui to look forward, drawing his attention to something significant. The man in the red headband cried out in alarm, pointing toward the ceiling or an unseen presence. A close-up on the headband man's face showed his mouth wide open in shock or distress. Multiple speech bubbles appeared, detailing the arduous journey of the reincarnators. 23 years of hardship, overcoming 1,000 dangers, and possessing hearts stronger than stone that abandoned everything. The guide announced that today, Zuo Hui's soul would return to its human form. A crowd of aged, shadowy figures appeared, their faces etched with hardship, proclaiming the concept of a truthful heart and a soulful body leading to resurrection. A massive red object, perhaps a seal or a stamp, slammed down with great force. A terrifying, monstrous visage looms over Zuo Hui, its features contorted in a savage expression. The entity's wide, toothy grin flashes with manic approval as Zuo Hui stares back in shock. The word of triumph echoes as the promise of resurrection is celebrated by the shadowy crowd. A figure, perhaps the one who had been shouting about resurrection, screams with ecstatic fervor. The scene of the crowd celebrating the arrival of their angel continues to swirl in chaotic orange and black. A close-up on Zuo Hui's face shows his utter bewilderment as the adoration washes over him. A figure, possibly the man with the red headband, cries out a desperate warning directed upward. The man with the red headband screams that he is going to be resurrected, his face contorted in raw emotion. A dark, powerful leg seems to kick out or move with immense force against the white background. The ecstatic crowd continues to chant the word of salvation as Zuo Hui remains frozen in confusion. A grotesque, shadowy figure leaps dramatically over a massive, dark, red-rimmed basin. The scene shifts to an intense orange glow emanating from the basin as a man cries out in exhilaration. A tight focus captures a single, wide, dark eye reflecting the terrifying spectacle. A cacophony of screams erupts from the surrounding crowd as the basin glows with intense, fiery light. Zuo Hui, looking terrified, is held by a looming, dark silhouette, exclaiming his confusion about the situation. A close-up on Zuo Hui's face shows his utter shock and dawning horror as he questions the reality before him. The crowd's panic intensifies, their shouts echoing around the glowing, bubbling cauldron. A desperate hand reaches out from the crowd, pleading for someone to intervene in the unfolding horror. From a high vantage point, two figures observe the scene, one standing calmly while the other is poised for action. Zuo Hui screams upward at the figure he knows, demanding to know what is happening and why. The man with the red headband confirmed that Zuo Hui was returning. A sudden outcry erupted from the crowd as they witnessed something shocking. The crowd exclaimed that someone was ascending from the steaming bowl. Zuo Hui stared, his mind struggling to process the sight of the rising vapor. He questioned if what he was seeing was smoke or something else entirely. The man with the red headband confirmed that what was rising was the soul itself. The crowd erupted in joyous shouts, identifying the ascending essence as Elder Lu's soul. The man with the red headband shouted that Elder Lu had been resurrected and was smiling down upon them. Zuo Hui, still confused, questioned if the ascending vapor was truly smoke. The crowd's adoration intensified, confirming that Elder Lu had ascended and was smiling down. Zuo Hui, still reeling from the horror, could only utter a choked address to the figures around him. The red-tinged atmosphere seemed to confirm the entity's claim of nirvanic rebirth. The man with the red headband insisted that as long as they threw their bodies into the unending inferno, they would be reborn into reality. He passionately declared that this was the method of resurrection they had discovered. The man urged Zuo Hui to believe everything unfolding before his eyes, swearing that resurrection was possible. Zuo Hui could only manage a weak internal thought, labeling the entire group as insane. The cavern exploded with the sound of the crowd, their voices unified in a single fervent cry for resurrection. Zuo Hui could only stare in disbelief as the scene shifted to a person being subjected to extreme duress in front of the audience. He questioned how this horrific spectacle could possibly be considered resurrection. A close-up on the faces of the crowd showed them grinning maniacally, their expressions utterly deranged. A shadowy figure screams a realization that the people surrounding them are demons. The man with the red headband, Tang, looks down at Zuo Hui with a concerned expression. Zuo Hui stares into a fiery abyss, surrounded by grasping, dark silhouettes, realizing this must be hell. Tang gently checks on Zuo Hui, asking if he is all right after the ordeal. Zuo Hui raises a hand to his face, his denial weak as the terror overwhelms him. His eyes, wide behind his glasses, stare blankly as a profound realization begins to dawn. He whispers a fragmented thought, acknowledging the presence of others. Zuo Hui looks out at the massive, adoring crowd gathered around the fiery basin. His gaze is fixed, sweat beading on his face as he tries to articulate the truth. He finally manages to articulate the horrifying identity of the figures surrounding him. The orange-hued crowd of shadowy figures seemed to press in on all sides, their faces obscured by darkness. A hand, trembling and covered in what looked like residue, clutched something close to a face. A single wide eye, filled with a deep, unsettling brown hue, stared out from the darkness. Zuo Hui's face, covered by his hand, showed an expression of utter shock and disbelief. A sharp exclamation of denial escaped him, a desperate refusal to accept what he was witnessing. A voice from above offered a simple reassurance that everything was fine. Another voice declared that the food tasted even better than the braised ribs his mother used to make. The shadowy crowd seemed to shift and murmur in the background, their presence oppressive. A close-up on a mouth confirmed a taste of pure delight, followed by an enthusiastic declaration of deliciousness. The man with the red headband offered a soft, knowing chuckle in response to Zuo Hui's praise. Zuo Hui clutches something close to his face, tears mixing with residue in the orange glow. The man with the red headband asks if the food was very tasty, right? Zuo Hui chokes violently, his eyes wide with sudden physical distress. He coughs uncontrollably as the robed figure asks if something is wrong and if he is unwell. Zuo Hui manages to utter a single, choked syllable, pointing toward the source of his distress. Zuo Hui screams, demanding to know what the man put in the food he consumed. Tang, the man with the headband, calmly replies that it was beef. Zuo Hui stares, his mind struggling to process the simple, horrifying answer. Tang elaborates that it was beef from wild cows they hunted. He continues, explaining that because food is scarce in this place, their collection team hunts daily for everyone. The guide explained that the wild cow they hunted was a rare commodity, only available within the last 6 months, and Zuo Hui acknowledged this with a simple acceptance. Zuo Hui could only process the mention of wild cows, his mind reeling. A sudden violent motion suggested Zuo Hui was trying to break free from the conversation. Zuo Hui demanded to know how this desolate place could possibly sustain wild cows. He recalled witnessing someone willingly jump into a pot of boiling oil, while others rushed to consume the resulting substance. The horrifying conclusion struck him. It was not beef at all, but human flesh. Zuo Hui recoiled from the man with the red headband, questioning the entire narrative of revolting against Yama and achieving nirvana rebirth through carving names. He vehemently declared that the entire story was absolute falsehood. Zuo Hui accused the guide, insisting that the only goal was to trick him into jumping into the pot. His eyes burned with terror as he screamed the accusation that they simply wanted to consume him. Zuo Hui recoiled in shock, questioning the man's earlier statement with a sharp exclamation. Tang, the man with the red headband, urged him to remain composed. Zuo Hui's eyes remained wide, his mind struggling to reconcile the horror of the previous scene. Tang commanded him to focus, telling him to look at what was happening now. Zuo Hui reluctantly obeyed, his gaze drawn to the figure emerging from the fiery basin. The man with the red headband confirmed that Zuo Hui had witnessed the soul's ascension. Zuo Hui stared at the rising vapor, still questioning if it was truly smoke or something more sinister. Tang insisted that the soul was returning to its body, a process they called nirvanic rebirth. Zuo Hui's eyes darted to the surrounding shadowy figures, their adoration now seeming utterly deranged. He looked back at Tang, his voice strained as he questioned the nature of the beef they had just consumed. Zuo Hui's face, slick with sweat, showed utter bewilderment as he processed the conversation. Tang, the man with the red headband, confirmed that they were planning to use the leftover head as an offering to request more food. Zuo Hui's eye focused intensely, questioning if this unbelievable story could actually be the truth. He vehemently questioned the existence of wild cows in this supposed land of the dead, wondering if Tang had been speaking only the truth. Tang let out a sound of amusement, asserting that all creatures, after life and death, eventually ended up here. He continued, stating that after experiencing so much, Zuo Hui would surely believe him. Tang met Zuo Hui's gaze, confirming that this place was indeed the afterlife. He declared that this was the land of Yama, not just the land of the living dead. Zuo Hui, looking downcast, repeated the word rooms, questioning the nature of the previous setting. The scene expanded to show the vast, orange-hued cavern, filled with shadowy figures surrounding the two men. The man with the red headband explained that the rooms were where Yama passed the time, using the promise of resurrection as a means to control them. He clarified that outside these rooms existed a vast world. That world, he confirmed, was comprised of 18 continents. This entire realm, he stated, was what they commonly referred to as Diyu. Zuo Hui could only process the word Diyu, the note confirming it was the Chinese term for hell with 18 floors of punishment. The guide revealed that the records of Diyu, the land of the living dead, and Yama itself had been preserved until this day. He then asserted that people had been resurrected from this place for a long time, and it couldn't be just one person. Zuo Hui stared, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief at the man's words. The guide explained that those resurrected possessed a thorough understanding of each continent and its corresponding level in hell. He then pointed out that the ground Zuo Hui was currently standing on was one of those levels. The guide explained that the current location was the 9th floor of Diyu, known as the Hell of Oil Cauldrons. Zhuhai reacted with visible shock, questioning what the hell of oil cauldrons entailed. He repeated his question, demanding to know the nature of this place. The guide clarified that it was where they endured punishment via oil cauldrons, which were also used for their resurrection. They used this process to purify their flesh bodies of all impurities, allowing their souls to break free from human confinement and achieve resurrection. This process was described as being similar to that of a phoenix, leading them to call themselves nirvanic resurrectors. The guide mentioned that this event occurred when the deadline arrived every 500 years. During this time, the birds of fire gathered upon the bronze stem, engulfing everything in a sea of flames. They dove into the raging fire without a second thought. As within the flames, the sounds became clearer and the aura exceedingly imperial. Ultimately, they broke free from all flesh confinements, achieving resurrection, simply put, a phoenix nirvana from the ashes. The guide explained that Elder Liu embraced the cauldron like a phoenix, enduring immense pain for true nirvanic rebirth. Zhuhai reacted with immediate outrage, dismissing the explanation as utter nonsense. He vehemently accused them of encouraging suicide, not rebirth. Zhuhai shouted that they were murderers who had driven people to their deaths. The guide paused, a slight smile playing on his lips, questioning the concept of death. The man with the red headband countered by asking if they were not already dead to begin with. So he stared, his eyes wide behind his glasses, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his face. A stark realization dawned on him as the truth settled in. He acknowledged the grim reality. They were already deceased. But Zhuhai immediately questioned how such despicable methods could possibly lead to resurrection. The shadowy figure questioned whether the words being spoken were true or false. Then, a moment of silence passed before the next thought emerged. Zhuhai pressed for proof, demanding to know why they had to jump into a cauldron of oil and how this guaranteed resurrection. The guide responded with a dismissive laugh. The guide then recounted a story of a youth similar to Zhuhai from many years prior. This youth was kind, pure, and deeply fearful of the unknown world after death. But he possessed a powerful motive, compelling him to bravely battle within the rooms. With great effort, he conquered the game in each room, steadfastly enduring Yama's tests. At the same time, he formed many alliances to fight alongside. Until one day, Zhuhai, still reeling, looked on with a face etched in confusion and lingering dread. The guide confirmed that the youth had experienced the same agonizing process in the cauldron. After enduring the searing pain of the flames, a pain far worse than anything he had known, he finally surrendered to the darkness. But he could never have conceived of what awaited him upon his next awakening. He was returned, resurrected into the relentless downpour of the city streets. Zhuhai could only utter a choked sound of disbelief, questioning the reality of his return. Having survived the soul-wrenching agony of the flames, he was now back, yet he could only utter a single stunned word. He paused, a single word hanging in the air, before the memory of the scars that remained on his body surfaced. These marks would serve as a constant reminder of the suffering endured to reach this point. They would also stand as a memorial to the allies he had lost along the way. Zhuhai could only utter a sound of profound shock, realizing the gravity of the situation. A figure, clearly the one who had been speaking, confirmed that Zhuhai had indeed returned. This imposing, tattooed man, his face partially obscured by a red band, asserted his identity with unwavering certainty. He then declared his purpose, stating he had come back specifically to offer assistance. Zhuhai's wide, terrified eyes, magnified behind his glasses, confirmed his dawning horror. He could only stammer a fragmented realization that this entire nightmare was undeniably real. The scene dissolved into a bleak, desolate landscape under a pale, stormy sky, featuring the silhouette of bare, skeletal trees. Dark, vertical streaks, perhaps blood or ink, rained down from the oppressive heavens onto the cracked earth below. A dark, sharp blade, slick with fresh crimson, swept across the frame, suggesting a recent violent act. The hooded figures reappeared, one looking on with wide-eyed concern, while the other whispered about the presence of wandering entities. Tang explained that within this desolate wasteland, a terrifying creature existed. They silently conveyed that in a flash, these creatures would send you to another hell. The figures around them silently confirmed this grim reality. They referred to these entities as wandering demons, creatures that enjoyed killing humans. Around here, they had a saying that if wandering demons appeared, no corpse or bones would remain. The intensity in the young girl's eyes conveyed the seriousness of their warning. The desolate landscape was filled with countless shadowy figures, a sea of black dots under an orange sky. A lone silhouette stood atop a white structure, observing the scene. A close-up revealed a torso covered in dark, scratch-like markings, suggesting immense suffering. Zhuhai stared, his mind reeling from the revelation of these new threats in this afterlife. Zhuhai could only articulate his shock, realizing this was the price of returning. Tang confirmed that this was the cost, the price of resurrection. The imposing figure of Tang stated that hundreds here craved resurrection, but feared the heavy toll. He questioned why they wouldn't rush for the chance if it was right in front of them. Tang explained that not everyone possessed the fortitude to endure the required suffering. He directly challenged Zuo Hui, asking if he had the courage to withstand the pain of 1,000 blazes. Tang then referenced the agonizing cries of Elder Liu, questioning what kind of bravery an elderly man needed to willingly enter the cauldron. The guide declared that such an act was fueled by the power of love and the strength of nostalgia. A skeletal, aged figure was shown leaping upward with outstretched arms, embracing the fiery fate. Zhu Hai stared, his mind struggling to comprehend the depth of devotion required for such a sacrifice. A figure with long white hair expressed that he desperately wanted to see his son and knew his time was short. Zuo Hui's eyes, magnified behind his glasses, showed a sudden, intense focus. A shadowy figure called out Zuo Hui's name as another imposing figure stood in the light. The imposing figure asked Zuo Hui if he loved his mother. A close-up on Zuo Hui's eye showed a flicker of intense emotion and sweat beading on his brow. Zuo Hui, the man with the headband, confirmed with certainty that he absolutely did love his mother. The imposing figure then asked if Zuo Hui was prepared to pay the necessary price for his love. Zuo Hui's face was shadowed as he looked toward the imposing figure, his expression tense. Zuo Hui, looking downcast, questioned if jumping into the cauldron would guarantee his resurrection. The imposing figure confirmed with a simple, unwavering affirmation that he would be resurrected. A simple affirmation of agreement was offered in the face of the impossible. The imposing figure responded with an encouraging declaration of Zuo Hui's bravery and angelic status. The figure proclaimed Zuo Hui an angel capable of true resurrection. Others in the crowd echoed the sentiment, expressing genuine happiness for his survival. Tang, the man with the red headband, promised to use all his might to help Zuo Hui resurrect. He then instructed Zuo Hui to return and rest for a while. Tang assured him that he would work out all the small details regarding the resurrection that very night. Zuo Hui could only offer a weak acknowledgement of the instructions. The imposing figure then commanded someone to escort Angel Zuo Hui to a place of rest. Zuo Hai looked on, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and lingering confusion. A commanding presence dictates that Zuo Hui be taken to the best room. The order is acknowledged with a resounding affirmation. Zuo Hui, accompanied by several hooded figures, finds himself in a dark, earthen tunnel, questioning the situation. The man with the red headband smiles serenely, urging Zuo Hui to wait for him. One of the hooded figures beckons Zuo Hui forward with a plea to follow. Zuo Hai reluctantly agrees, allowing himself to be led deeper into the cavernous passage. The group proceeds down the dimly lit, root-like tunnel. A figure with a crown-like silhouette appears at the end of the passage, drawing them forward. The tunnel stretches onward, illuminated by small, flickering lights. A terrifying red-tinged visage with a massive manic grin fills the frame, declaring a fierce resolve. The monstrous grin of the entity echoed its satisfaction, confirming Zuo Hui's promise. The cavern walls bore the etched names of those who had kept their word and carved their mark. The entity's unsettling smile widened, confirming that all the necessary components for the next stage were now assembled. Zuo Hui stepped toward the bright opening, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. A cloaked figure emerged from the tunnel, urgently calling out for the priest. Another robed figure rushed forward, shouting for the priest with increasing alarm. Tang, the man with the red headband, looked back with a calm, questioning expression, asking what had transpired. The frantic figure let out a sound of shock, his face contorted in distress. He then boomed the incredible news that the Holy Lord had returned. Zuo Hui, still standing at the threshold, watched the commotion, and the robed figure questioned why he seemed so agitated. The robed figure expressed alarm, stating that something significant had occurred. A hand gestured with a plea, indicating a request for something. The robed figure confirmed that this was their best available accommodation. A close-up on an eye showed Zuo Hui's intense focus amidst the surrounding chaos. The room was described as having a smooth floor, a comfortable bed, and a relaxing fireplace. Zuo Hui questioned if this setting was truly comparable to rooms in the world above. The robed figure offered a simple confirmation that it was indeed similar. A hand reached out, suggesting the room appeared quite inviting. Tang offered a final assurance that he would be right outside if anything was needed. Zuo Hui responded with a grateful acknowledgement of the assistance. Zuo Hai stood alone in the orange-lit space, the barred door suggesting a confinement he had just escaped. A shadow loomed large over the rumpled bedding, hinting at the presence of others nearby. He sat slumped on the edge of the bed, the weight of his recent ordeal pressing down on his weary frame. A close-up on his profile showed a man with a headband, his expression one of deep contemplation. His intense gaze seemed fixed on something beyond the frame, questioning the reality of his situation. His eyes reflected a chaotic montage of fire and suffering, mirroring the elder's fate. The entity's voice echoed, confirming that 100 victories meant freedom and a return home. Tang, the man with the headband, stood illuminated, proclaiming their method of rebirth through fire. Zuo Hui turned away from the light, his silhouette stark against the white void, processing the impossible. His face, etched with exhaustion, focused on the question of whether this terrifying resurrection was truly achievable. His hands clutch his head as a desperate internal question surfaces about the possibility of return. The question intensifies, wondering if the resurrection story could actually be real. A vision of the smiling woman appears, prompting him to consider trying this impossible path. His eyes, magnified behind his glasses, show a fierce concentration as he grapples with the decision. He collapses onto a surface, crying out in pain as a sharp jolt hits his head. A sharp exclamation of pain escapes him as he clutches his head. He curls up, groaning that the pain is unbearable. Wiping his face with his hand, he tries to clear the lingering confusion. His gaze lifts, questioning what is happening to his head. A sudden memory surfaces. The moment he left the sterile room, the man with the red headband reminded Zuo Hui that he had nearly succumbed to the wandering demons the night before. Zuo Hui, still processing the revelation of his death, questioned what had almost taken him. The hooded figure confirmed that it was the wandering demons that nearly claimed him. The man with the red headband looked up at the sky, his expression grim as the others echoed the warning about the wandering demons. One of the disciples reported that they had encountered a wandering demon, and that the other disciples were already gone. The remaining figures looked toward the sky, their faces etched with worry for their missing comrades. Zuo Hui, his eyes wide with renewed terror, urgently demanded to know the status of the Holy Lord. A hooded figure responded with a trembling acknowledgement of the Holy Lord's name. Another disciple confirmed that the Holy Lord was also missing. Zuo Hui's panic spiked as he demanded to know what happened to her and where she was. Zuo Hui, still reeling from the revelation of his death, could only manage a single, confused question. Peering from behind the dark silhouettes, he demanded to know who was being referred to. Tang, the man with the red headband, stepped forward, his eyes wide and unnervingly white. He coughed roughly, his voice strained as he struggled to speak the name of the missing Holy Lord. Another figure nearby could only manage a choked sound, confirming the gravity of the situation. A dark, sharp object seemed to pierce the air above them, emphasizing the danger. Tang looked up toward the sky, his expression shifting to one of profound alarm. He cried out, pointing toward a distant, shadowy figure that was rapidly approaching. Zuo Hui followed his gaze, his own eyes widening as he recognized the figure. He stared intensely, realizing with a jolt that the approaching figure was someone he knew. A shadowy figure in the desolate landscape exclaims in shock about the Holy Lord's presence. The figure's legs are visible, one seemingly ending in a sharp point as another bubble of shock appears. A close-up on Tang's face shows his eyes wide with utter astonishment at the sight. The shadowy figure, now fully revealed as a woman in a red hood, stands over the remains of a defeated wandering demon. The woman's face is revealed beneath the hood, her eyes dark and intense, labeled as Holy Lord Ju Yanwen, age 24. A massive dark eye fills the frame, focusing intensely on Zuo Hui with a single word directed at him. Zuo Hui, now in a different orange-toned setting, stares at a figure behind a barred wooden door, shouting in recognition. Zuo Hui's face, wearing glasses and a headband, breaks into a wide, relieved smile as he recognizes the person. The figure behind the bars, heavily shadowed, is recognized by Zuo Hui with a choked question about his uncle. A close-up on the shadowed man's lips shows him offering a brief, regretful acknowledgement before speaking. The figure in the shadows delivered a chilling message, claiming Tang had sent them to end Zuo Hui's life, prompting a bewildered, "Eh?" from Zuo Hui. The mysterious figure, cloaked in a deep red hood, stood with an unnerving stillness against the gray sky. A gloved hand, clad in black, extended downward, poised for action. Dark, viscous tendrils seemed to writhe around the figure's legs, suggesting a connection to the dark environment. A group of hooded older figures peered over a surface, their faces slick with sweat, observing the confrontation. The red-hooded figure moved toward a lone dark silhouette on the ground, while the crowd below called out the name, "Ju!" Tang, the man with the red headband, stepped forward, his white eyes fixed on the newcomer, asking if the red-hooded figure was all right. The two figures faced each other, the imposing Tang towering over the smaller hooded newcomer. The red-hooded figure lowered its head, its face obscured by shadow, offering a quiet assurance that they were fine. Tang then looked up, his expression shifting as he uttered a single significant word. "Father." The white, vacant eyes of the figure in the red hood stared out from the darkness. The red-hooded figure, Ju, offered a gentle assurance that she was fine, as long as Zuo Hui was okay. She then wiped a smudge from her cheek, her expression softening into a faint, tired smile. Tang, the man with the red headband, instructed her to change her clothes and take a rest today. Tang then announced with a broad smile that all preparations for their angel's resurrection were complete. He declared that only the final step remained before Zuo Hui could return. Tang leaned in close to Ju, his voice taking on a serious tone as he called out her name. Jo looked up, her eyes now burning with a fierce, determined red, and gave a sharp affirmation. With a resolute nod, she stated that she would go right now. Tang watched her depart, a subtle, knowing smirk playing on his lips as she moved away. A stark, wide eye registers a sudden moment of realization or shock. The imposing figure, seemingly the leader, commands his followers to secure the remains of the defeated demon, noting their potential future utility. The followers express apprehension, recognizing the remains as the head of a wandering demon. The leader dismisses their fear with a sharp retort, urging them to hurry up and handle the dead creature. A brief silent moment follows as a figure falls or is moved in the background, observed by a grimly focused eye. The leader stands tall against the desolate sky, a faint light emanating from a weapon or energy source near him. The red-hooded figure, Ju, is seen entering a dark, cavernous opening. The leader's face fills the frame, his expression conveying a chilling satisfaction as he assigns the final unpleasant task to Ju. The leader gestures toward the sky, indicating that their angel is already awaiting them in the designated room. Zuo Hui, still processing the events, looks up at the sky with a mixture of dread and confusion. Zuo Hui is violently thrown down, letting out a sharp sound of impact. A gloved hand silences him with a finger to the lips, warning him not to move. Zuo Hui's eyes widen in absolute terror as two blades press close to his face. A harsh declaration rings out, correcting a previous assumption. The menacing figure questions Zuo Hui about which part of him would be the most delicate. The assailant continues with a chilling description of how Zuo Hui will be prepared later. Zuo Hui lets out a choked sound of shock and disbelief at the threat. His wide eye reflects the terrifying proximity of the blade as he stammers a confused question about the attacker's identity. The attacker responds with a knowing affirmation, suggesting recognition. The figure then asks a bizarre, specific question about Zuo Hui's physique. Zuo Qi desperately pleaded for the assailant to stop, questioning their actions as a blade loomed near his eye. The shadowy figure, raising its hand, declared its intention to take a sample. Zuo Hui's eye widened further, reflecting the sheer terror of the impending violation. The blade descended rapidly against a backdrop of dark, streaking motion. A raw, agonizing sound of pain erupted from Zuo Hui as the assault began. The scene dissolved into an orange void as Zuo Hui collapsed onto a surface, his body limp. His outstretched hand weakly reached toward the light of an archway in the distance. Zuo Hui stumbled through the opening, his body heavy with exhaustion and confusion. His eyes, still wide with lingering trauma, scanned the dimly lit passage ahead. He tried to process the recent horror, his mind struggling to remain coherent. Zuo Hui's wide eye registered utter confusion as he looked at the figure lying beside him. A close-up showed a metallic blade resting near the prone figure's body. He turned toward the fireplace, startled by a sudden movement near the bed. Zuo Hui could only utter a sound of shock as he saw the dark, cloaked figure pulling back a blanket. His expression shifted to one of dawning recognition as he looked at the figure. The cloaked figure seemed to be speaking, its presence dominating the small room. Zuo Hui's face contorted in a mixture of fear and disbelief as he recognized the person. The figure, now clearly visible, held a knife, causing Zuo Hui to recoil in terror. Zuo Hui's mouth opened in a silent scream, demanding to know who this person was and why they were threatening him with a weapon. He shouted, demanding an answer about the intentions of the person holding the knife. The cloaked figure dismisses Zuo Hui's frantic questions, stating there is nothing here. Zuo Hui, overwhelmed, demands to know the intentions of this mysterious person. The cloaked figure stands tall, its hands raised in a gesture of finality, while Zuo Hui sits bound on the floor, startled. A man identified as Smith, marked with the number 34, aggressively demands to know if Zuo Hui is leaving or not. Zuo Hui, still on the floor, can only stare in stunned silence at the confrontation. His expression shifts to one of utter disbelief as he processes the command to leave. Zhu Hai spins around, shouting after the retreating figure, demanding an explanation and asking if Tang sent this person to kill him. He frantically questions if this is another test or perhaps part of the promised resurrection process. The cloaked figure pauses, turning slightly to address the panicked young man. The figure offers a simple greeting, bringing the focus back to the immediate confrontation. The cloaked figure dismisses Zuo Hui's concerns, suggesting he shouldn't believe the tales told by the priest. Zuo Hai stares, his wide eye reflecting utter shock as he demands clarification on what was just said. The assailant gestures toward the dark archway, questioning if Zuo Hui truly intended to jump into the oil cauldron. The figure holding Zuo Hui down mocks him, calling him Dumb Hui instead of his name, declaring him incorrigibly stupid. Zuo Hui's eyes bulge behind his glasses, registering a fresh wave of surprise and confusion. He cries out in astonishment, demanding to know what the assailant has done to the other person. A close-up on Zuo Hui's eye shows a sudden sharp focus amidst the chaos. Zuo Hui recognizes the prone figure, exclaiming in disbelief that this is the elder who brought him here. Zuo Hui screams again, demanding to know what action was taken against his benefactor. The cloaked figure casually dismisses the commotion, stating he merely borrowed the elder's keys to unlock the door. The cloaked figure questioned Zuo Hui, asking if jumping into the oil was truly effective, given that all the elders were still waiting to do so. Zuo Hui could only recall Tang's words that not everyone possessed the courage. The assailant retorted that not everyone possessed brains either, leaving Zuo Hui speechless. The cloaked figure declared that whether Zuo Hui left or not, he himself was departing. Zuo Hui's eyes widened in alarm as the assailant warned that the other person was about to return, and once she arrived, Zuo Hui couldn't even think about leaving. Cao Ke demanded to know who was coming and insisted the person speak more clearly. The opening of the passage remained dark and foreboding. The assailant repeated his statement, asserting that Zuo Hui could simply wait there until his death. He ominously warned that this area's Yama was about to arrive. A close-up on Zuo Hui's eyes showed a mixture of fear and intense focus as he processed the threat. A sharp, elongated object pierces the absolute blackness at an angle. Zuo Hui's face, slick with sweat, registered a silent curse as the confrontation intensified. The assailant, cloaked in black, stood menacingly over the prone form of the elder. Zuo Hui let out a sharp cry of distress as he watched the unfolding scene. His face, framed by his glasses, showed pure shock as he realized the danger was immediate. The area around them was bathed in an ominous orange glow, confirming the hostile environment. A terrifying masked visage, adorned with a crescent moon, dominated the background, its presence signaling a new threat. A faint wisp of smoke or vapor drifted across the frame, obscuring the lower half of the scene. A comb, dark and stylized, appeared in the darkness, its teeth sharp and defined. A close-up on a profile showed a mouth slightly parted, perhaps in exhaustion or fear. A figure whispers tenderly to Ju, acknowledging her presence. The voice confirms that the final step of their plan is now left to her. Silhouetted against a pale, fading sky, two figures embrace in a moment of shared gravity. The scene dissolves into a stark black panel dominated by a menacing blood-red inscription, "The Law of Yama." A sharp metallic point, perhaps a blade, cuts diagonally across the frame, emphasizing danger. A close-up on an eye, drawn with rough, dark strokes, shows intense focus amidst the gloom. Behind a man's strained face, a green, splattered mask with a crescent moon design looms menacingly. A figure in a dark cloak lets out a sharp, guttural sound in the oppressive darkness. Zuo Hui, his face slick with sweat, stares in shock at the figure emerging from the shadows. Zuo Hui's wide eye reflects the sudden, terrifying appearance of the masked individual. Zuo Hui recoiled as the masked figure loomed over him, its presence radiating menace. A close-up on Zuo Hui's eye showed the terror of realizing the assailant was someone he recognized. A swift, dark movement suggested the assailant was about to strike. Zuo Hui was violently thrown backward by an unseen force, his body hitting the ground hard. A sharp cry of surprise escaped Zuo Hui as he struggled to regain his bearings. The assailant, now standing over him, seemed to mock his confusion. A dark, elongated shadow stretched across the orange ground, emphasizing the assailant's dominance. Zuo Hui looked up, his vision blurring as he tried to identify the attacker. The assailant's hand moved with unnatural speed, a sharp object glinting in the dim light. Zuo Hui could only utter a sound of pure shock as the blade descended toward him. Zuo Hui lets out a pained cry, struggling against his restraints in the confined space. His gaze snaps upward, his eyes wide behind his glasses, reflecting intense focus. A desperate plea for rescue echoes in his mind, a final, silent call for help. The assailant, cloaked in black, stands ready with a gleaming blade, the red background intensifying the danger. The masked figure of the entity looms large, its expression one of cold finality as it declares the end. Zuo Hui recoils, his expression a mixture of shock and dawning horror as he recognizes the figure. The masked figure's dark eyes fixate on Zuo Hui, its presence radiating menace. A sudden violent motion suggests the assailant is about to strike, the tension palpable. Zuo Hui, overwhelmed by the sudden attack, throws his hands up defensively. The scene dissolves into a blinding flash of light and overwhelming orange, signaling a transition or impact. The assailant boasted that his success was entirely due to his incredible sixth sense. He implied that without it, the damage sustained would have been far more severe than just some broken skin. The terrifying, blood-splattered mask of the entity reappeared, its grin unsettling in the darkness. Zuo Hui, still reeling, expressed his strong dislike for stealthy actions and ambushes. He emphasized that people like him truly hated such sneaky maneuvers. The assailant, clad in black gloves, countered that this was the second time Zuo Hui had behaved this way toward him. The attacker warned that he might start to feel a little bit angry about the repeated provocations. Zuo Hui clutched his head, his hands stained with residue, as a surge of internal pressure built. The figure in the red hood commanded Zuo Hui to descend immediately. A sharply dressed man, identified as Smith, an underground boxer, stepped forward, guaranteeing he would not kill Zuo Hui. Zuo Kai remained silent, his expression one of deep contemplation against the orange backdrop. The scene shifted to a tense confrontation between Zuo Hui and a menacing green-masked figure. A visual element suggested a measurement or scale, perhaps indicating a difference in status or power. The masked figure spoke, mentioning that in the 2 days Zuo Hui has been present, many rumors have circulated about him. The figure continued, noting that the elders spoke of him with fear and reverence, calling him names like Holy Priest or the Rapier. The masked figure then indicated that among those rumors, there was one specific name that held significance. The man in the suit, presumably Tang, asserted his awareness of the rumors being spread. The masked figure then directly questioned Zuo Hui, asking if he was the Yama of this particular floor. Zuo Hui's face registered pure shock, his mind struggling to comprehend the title being applied to him. The man in the suit let out a short, dismissive sound, a brief laugh escaping his lips. The eerie, blood-splattered mask of the entity stared out with vacant, dark eyes. A sudden, sharp exclamation of surprise broke the silence, followed by a close-up of a sharp, cat-like eye. A figure in a dark suit raised a hand, signaling for everyone to halt their movements. The man in the suit demanded a moment to prepare himself before the next event. The masked figure, seemingly the red-hooded Jew, remained silent, its expression unreadable. The man in the suit, now identified as Smith, called out to Zuo Hui, referring to him mockingly as Dumb Hui. Smith declared that Zuo Hui, as the sole remaining audience member, was in for an amazing competition. He instructed Zuo Hui to use his limited vision to clearly observe him, the handsome player number 1 of the Netherworld. The red-hooded figure stood silently in the background, its presence ominous against the orange glow. A close-up on Smith's face showed a sharp blade positioned near his jawline, suggesting a self-inflicted mark or preparation. A sharp, inarticulate sound of shock escapes the assailant as the confrontation escalates. Smith, the man in the suit, declares his intention to defeat the clown who dares call himself Yama. The masked figure's eyes, now glowing with malevolent intensity, fixate on Zuo Hui. The scene plunges into darkness, focusing only on the assailant's grim, determined face. The assailant lunges forward, his movement a blur of black against the oppressive background. Zuo Hui watches the attack, his mind racing to process the sudden violence. The masked figure Ju stands motionless, observing the unfolding fight with an unreadable expression. The man in the suit, Smith, moves with practiced aggression, his focus entirely on Zuo Hui. Rumors of the man's strength, particularly his lower body, are shouted by the masked figure. Zuo Hui stares in utter confusion, questioning the mention of a leg when the figure appears to be missing one. Zuo Hui's stunned expression suggested that the rapier attached to the leg was a significant, unexpected detail. Smith, the man in the suit, commented on the shame of losing a good leg, yet noted the resulting grotesque figure looked strong. The masked figure, Ju, pointed out that this powerful modification still possessed an obvious fatal flaw. The masked figure continued, preparing to reveal the critical weakness of the enhancement. The flaw was revealed to be its uselessness in close-quarters combat. The white-haired figure, perhaps a different combatant, smiled faintly, confirming the assessment of the close-range limitation. Zuo Hui remained silent, his mind struggling to process the tactical information being exchanged. The masked figure's profile was grim, suggesting a deep understanding of combat limitations. Smith, the man in the suit, then posed a direct challenge to Zuo Hui regarding his own mobility. He questioned how Zuo Hui, with his current state, would manage to swing his leg in a fight. A swift, powerful strike connects, sending Zuo Hui reeling backward in the dark space. Smith, the man in the suit, stares down at Zuo Hui with an expression of intense disbelief. The masked figure, Ju, observes the exchange with an unreadable stillness. The assailant, recovering from the unexpected counter, notes the surprising resilience of Zuo Hui's defense. Zuo Hui, still reeling from the impact, manages to maintain his footing despite the blow. The masked figure, Ju, steps back slightly, her posture suggesting readiness for the next move. Smith, the man in the suit, recovers his composure, his eyes narrowing with renewed focus on Zuo Hui. Zuo Hui, breathing heavily, prepares himself for the inevitable continuation of the confrontation. The masked figure Ju remains a silent, ominous presence in the background. The tension in the orange-lit room escalates as the two combatants prepare to clash again, yet a sudden internal exclamation of defiance cut through the moment. The assailant, Smith, let out a burst of maniacal laughter as he pressed his advantage. The red-hooded figure, Ju, seemed to observe the exchange with detached amusement. Smith taunted Zuo Hui, asking if he had witnessed the maneuver. Zuo Hui, still reeling from the blow, could only process the speed of the attack. The masked figure, Ju, pointed out that Smith's reliance on his modified leg was his primary vulnerability. She emphasized that the sword supporting his weight was a critical point of failure in close combat. Smith, recovering his stance, questioned if Ju believed her own assessment of his limitations. Zuo Hui, regaining some clarity, focused on the masked figure's observation about the leg's support. The masked figure, Ju, then posed a pointed question regarding the structural integrity of Smith's modified limb. The abstract motion suggests a sudden, powerful strike in the white void. The red-hooded figure, Ju, warns that the competition ends once balance is lost. Zuo Hui watches with wide-eyed shock as the fight erupts between the assailant and the masked figure. Smith, the man in the suit, lets out a triumphant cry as he seemingly gains the upper hand. The masked figure's eye, glowing with a sinister red light, focuses intently on the unfolding action. A pale, exposed arm is visible against the dark background, perhaps belonging to the masked figure. A close-up on a grim face shows intense concentration, sweat beading on the brow. Zuo Hui utters a sound of disbelief, questioning how the masked figure could withstand such an assault. The masked figure, Ju, stands poised, her stance suggesting she is ready for the next phase of the conflict. Smith, the man in the suit, declares with a wide grin that the competition is definitively over. Zuo Hui's wide eyes conveyed a sense of disbelief, realizing the opponent was not even a true competitor. The red-hooded figure, Ju, stood tall against the orange backdrop, her silhouette striking. Even though she was amazing, Zuo Hui felt a fresh wave of terror, realizing she was even more frightening. A close-up on Zuo Hui's eye showed his shock as he registered the figure's gender. The figure's masked face, speckled with white, loomed in the darkness, radiating menace. Zuo Hui could only manage a stunned realization that the terrifying figure was a girl. The silhouette of the girl, Ju, stood against a pale, cloudy sky, revealing her scant attire. Back in the orange-lit room, a figure coughed violently while collapsed on the floor. Zuo Hui, still stunned, could only offer a silent acknowledgement of the scene. The assailant, perhaps Smith, spat out a mouthful of liquid with a satisfied expression. A chilling exclamation signals the entity's intent to unleash its true capabilities. The scene shifts to an orange-hued landscape, where Zuo Hui observes the confrontation between the masked figure and the man in the suit. The masked figure, identified as the one Zuo Hui called Dumb Hui, expresses a need for chivalry toward women, suggesting they should be given an initial advantage. A dark blood-stained hand is shown, emphasizing the violence that has occurred. Zuo Hui, watching with wide, terrified eyes, processes the statement about the woman being too dangerous. The masked figure declares the necessity of releasing its full power, letting out a strained cry. A close-up on a single, intense green eye suggests a shift in focus or power activation. The man in the suit, Smith, is shown reacting to the masked figure's declaration, recognizing the need to proceed cautiously. The red-hooded figure, Ju, is seen in a dynamic pose, suggesting she is about to engage in combat. Smith, the man in the suit, prepares himself, acknowledging the need to tread carefully against the opponent. A stark warning echoes that failure to comply will result in dire consequences. A close-up on a reptilian-like eye reflects the intensity of the moment. A violent, sweeping motion, marked by red streaks, suggests a brutal attack is underway. A voice declares that survival will be difficult under these circumstances. Zuo Hui stares, his eyes wide with shock, as the chaotic struggle unfolds before him. A figure, likely the masked assailant, screams a declaration of relentless striking. Splatters of dark liquid mark the background, indicating the violence of the exchange. A man, perhaps Smith, lets out a strained cry of exertion amidst the chaos. Multiple figures engage in a flurry of rapid, aggressive movements against a dark backdrop. The white-haired combatant and the red-hooded figure face off, their expressions intense. Even though continuously struck, the opponent did not weaken but instead grew stronger. It appeared that this formidable fighter had been holding back their true strength. A figure praised the amazing power of the opponent's leg, while another figure interjected with a warning. The masked figure questioned if Zuo Hui was unaware of this fact. The assailant declared that the weapon used could only inflict superficial damage to the skin. They insisted that the weapon only needed to avoid the vital areas to remain non-lethal. The attacker boasted that this type of weapon was not fatal at all. Zuo Hui reacted with wide-eyed shock, realizing the opponent had successfully evaded the strike. A close-up on Zuo Hui's face showed his intense focus amidst the surrounding chaos. A final thought lingered, suggesting something more was about to happen. Smith, the man in the suit, declared his intent to strike with fierce determination. The masked figure, Ju, appeared to be observing the confrontation with a detached, unsettling gaze. A collective realization dawned that Smith was gaining the upper hand in the exchange. The masked figure, Ju, questioned Smith's understanding, asking if he truly comprehended the situation. Ju then stated that unless Zuo Hui's limbs were severed, Smith possessed more than enough energy to continue the engagement. Smith roared his refusal to yield, promising a relentless barrage of strikes. A violent impact struck the masked figure, sending a spray of dark liquid across the frame. The masked figure expressed regret over the outcome, despite the intensity of the blow. Ju then questioned how a weapon of Smith's caliber could possibly inflict such severe harm. Smith, his face contorted in a triumphant snarl, demanded to know if Zuo Hui finally admitted defeat. Smith's face, streaked with dark fluid, showed a grim satisfaction as he continued his taunts. A close-up on his eye revealed a chilling lack of remorse, reflecting the surrounding darkness. Zuo Hui still